Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most quietly relentless kitchens in American history, the mid-century suburban housewives' week, where the meals were scheduled, the grease was saved, and the gelatin mold was not a joke but a social statement. Not a quick 30-minute recipe video, not a nostalgic montage of pie cooling on a windowsill. 55 hours a week, a can opener that got a genuine workout, and a casserole dish that never fully cooled down. If a long, calm tour through a 1955 kitchen sounds like your idea of a good night's sleep, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually want someone narrating what America smelled like at 5:45 on a Tuesday evening, butter and fried onions and a percolator that gave up hours ago. And a huge thank you to one of you for suggesting this one. I hope you know what you've started. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And bonus points if you tell me the last thing you cooked that could technically have been suspended in gelatin. Go ahead and dim the lights, turn on a fan for some soft white noise, get comfortable and pull the blanket up. Maybe don't think too hard about what's in the ceramic keeper on the back of the stove. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to cook 3 full meals a day, 7 days a week, for a family that expected all of them on time? How did one standing rib roast quietly become 4 entirely different meals across 5 days without anyone saying the word leftovers out loud? What exactly was cream of mushroom soup doing in that casserole, and why did it work so unreasonably well? Did the gelatin mold wobble with confidence, or was there always a small private panic at the unmolding? The grease keeper, who refilled it, who decided it was full, and was there a system? Could you survive building an entire week of dinners around a husband's commute schedule, a grocery budget of $30, and approximately 40 recipes involving a can of Campbell's, and seriously, who looked at a packet of Lipton onion soup mix and thought, dip? Congratulations. The year is 1955, and you've come to in a brand new tract house on Long Island, Levittown, to be exact. The linoleum is cold under your feet, the percolator is already making its decision about your morning, and there's a roasting chicken thawing in the sink that needs to be somewhere specific by 6 o'clock tonight. Good luck. You are awake before anyone else, and the kitchen is already waiting for you. It's a little after 6, the linoleum is cold through your slippers, and the day's first job is not to make breakfast, but to decide the entire shape of the day around the oven. There is a husband who leaves at a fixed time, and children who leave at a fixed time, and both of those times are now your problem. You tie the apron over the house dress. The schedule starts the moment your feet hit the floor. The percolator goes on first. It's a stovetop model, probably the same one your mother used, and it begins working immediately with a low, steady, and patient chug that fills the kitchen with the smell of coffee before the sun is fully up. By 8 o'clock it will have been sitting on the burner long enough to go bitter and slightly scorched. By 10 o'clock it will taste like a decision you regret. You drink it anyway, because the percolator is running and pouring it out would be wasteful, and wastefulness is not something you do. For a few minutes, though, before the house stirs, it's just you and the dark window and the small blue ring of flame under the pot, and the quiet is wide enough to stand in. Breakfast comes next. Not coffee, the actual breakfast, the one you cook and serve and plate for other people before you eat anything yourself. The husband gets eggs, fried, scrambled, or soft-boiled, depending on the day, with toast and a glass of bird's eye frozen orange juice concentrate mixed the night before and kept cold in the refrigerator. The orange juice is a small modern miracle. Before 1946, this required an actual orange and actual squeezing every single morning, which is the kind of detail that explains why the frozen concentrate industry became enormous within a decade. The children get cereal. Sugar Frosted Flakes launched in 1952, Sugar Smacks in 1953, and by mid-decade, the cereal aisle has become a sugar-forward negotiation between your children and the television they watched on Saturday morning. Tony the Tiger has been in your house, effectively, since 1952. He didn't ask. The box is on the table. Doreen, who is 7, tilts the box slowly until the prizes fall out before the cereal does, with the focused determination of a safecracker. Meanwhile, you are also making lunch boxes. 3 of them. A sandwich goes in first, peanut butter and jelly, or a slice of last night's meatloaf between white bread, or occasionally a deviled ham spread that comes in a small tin with a devil on the label and tastes roughly like its own packaging. Then a piece of fruit, probably an apple. Then a small bag of chips, or a cookie if you baked yesterday. The lunchbox closes with a metal latch that Doreen's little brother has already broken once. You close it with the broken latch anyway and hope for the best. The next 45 minutes are the tightest of the day. Between the percolator going on and the husband leaving, inside that one narrow window, you are frying eggs, watching toast, pouring juice, packing 3 lunchboxes, and beginning, already, before anyone else has finished eating, to think about dinner. Not lunch. Dinner. Dinner is the fixed point. It must be on the table between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m., timed to the sound of a car in the driveway, and everything between now and then is scaffolding built around that one requirement. You already know this. You have known it since home economics in high school, where Mrs. Patterson walked the class through the USDA Basic 7 food groups with the gravity of someone delivering operational orders. Proteins, grains, dairy, vegetables, all required, all daily, all your responsibility. The government had opinions about your dinner table. They were specific opinions, published in pamphlet form, and Mrs. Patterson had copies. You still think about the Basic 7 when you're standing at the stove. Some lessons arrive early and stay forever. The family leaves, the kitchen goes quiet, the percolator hisses once and then settles. You're still in the apron, standing on the linoleum, and the day, the real day, the one that takes 18 to 20 hours a week just for cooking and cleanup, is only now beginning. You are standing at the range cracking eggs into a pan before most of the house has opened its eyes. Breakfast in this kitchen is not a piece of toast eaten standing up. It is a full sit-down meal, expected and assembled every single weekday. There are eggs, there is bacon or sausage, there is toast, and there is juice. And all of it has to land on the table at the same moment a husband and several children appear wanting it. You crack the second egg. The pan is already deciding how this goes. The eggs are the real performance. You're doing them 2 ways at once, scrambled for the children, fried for your husband, who has opinions about yolk firmness that he has never once articulated, but will communicate through a very specific silence. The bacon goes in the second pan. The bacon grease from yesterday is already in there, saved in the skillet because throwing fat away is the kind of thing that would require an explanation. The toast is under the broiler because this kitchen doesn't have a pop-up toaster, or it does, and it works about 60% of the time. The juice is bird's eye frozen orange juice concentrate, reconstituted from a cardboard tube that requires 3 cans of cold water and a firm commitment to stirring. It arrived in 1946 and immediately made fresh squeezed oranges feel like unnecessary theatre. You pour it into a glass pitcher. The pitcher is part of a set. The set is important. Now, the children. They are not eating the eggs. They have already stationed themselves in front of the cereal boxes, which have been engineered by people at Kellogg's who understood that if you put a tiger on a box and call the contents sugar-frosted flakes, children will request them with the focused determination of a labor negotiation. Sugar-frosted flakes launched in 1952. Sugar smacks followed in 1953. The boxes are large. The sugar content is not discussed. The children eat around the cartoon and leave the table in under 4 minutes, which is the only efficiency in this entire operation. A neighbour, Donna Marsh, comes by most mornings around 8:15. After the bus has gone, she brings nothing. She doesn't need to. The percolator is already on its second cycle. The coffee has been sitting at near boiling since 6, going slowly and magnificently bitter in the way that percolated coffee does when left too long, which is always. Donna sits down, wraps both hands around her cup, and says nothing for a moment. This is the coffee clatch. It is not a scheduled event. It simply happens, the same way weather happens. The Basic 7, your framework from home economics, now trimmed to the Basic 4, says breakfast should cover a grain, a dairy, a fruit, and a protein. You have covered all 4 before 7:15. This is genuinely impressive when you think about it, which you don't, because there isn't time, and also you've been doing it every day since the wedding. The eggs are plated. The toast is buttered. The bacon is drained on a folded paper bag because paper towels exist but feel slightly extravagant on a Tuesday. The husband eats in about 9 minutes. He reads the paper while doing it, which means the eggs could be almost anything and the assessment would come only through the yolk firmness silence, which this morning is neutral. He takes his coffee in a wide, flat and slightly chipped cup. He leaves. He leaves. The door closes. The kitchen is briefly, completely quiet. The grease in the skillet is still ticking. The percolator is still going. There are 4 plates, 2 cereal bowls, a juice pitcher, a skillet, a second pan, a broiler tray, and a cutting board, all of which are now your problem. Donna refills her cup without asking. The day is approximately 45 minutes old. You set the percolator going before you do anything else, because the coffee has to be ready when he comes downstairs and it has to stay ready long after. This is not a machine that brews once and stops. It cycles the same coffee up over the grounds again and again, kept near boiling on a back burner, holding through breakfast and into the long stretch of morning after everyone has gone. You fill the basket and clamp the lid. The pot will be running for hours, whether you want it to or not. By 9 o'clock, the coffee smells less like coffee and more like a decision you made at 6 that has slowly lost confidence in itself. Scorched. Slightly bitter. Not unpleasant exactly, just aggressively committed to the idea of being hot. You pour yourself a second cup anyway. The percolator does not offer alternatives. This is where Donna Marsh comes in. She knocks at the side door, always the side door, never the front, because the front door is for company and salesmen and you're neither to each other. She's holding a plate, warm, covered, and faintly steaming under a dish towel. Under the dish towel are 7-layer bars, still warm, which means she's been up since before you were, which she would never say out loud. You get 2 cups from the cabinet. The percolator has been waiting for this moment all morning. Steam lifts off both cups in the cool kitchen and leans toward the window, and for a moment neither of you says anything. You just hold the heat and watch it go. Let's talk about what a coffee clatch actually is. It's not a party. It's a chair pulled close to another chair in a kitchen that smells like bacon from 2 hours ago and coffee from right now, and 2 women catching up on everything the day has already done before noon. Nobody has named it anything. It happens 4 mornings out of 5, and it is the most efficiently organized institution in the neighborhood, with no charter, no minutes, and absolutely no men. What gets discussed? Whose kids have a cold? Whether the new family on Birchwood has a dog? The pot roast technique from last week's Good Housekeeping? And the general consensus that the supermarket rearranged the canned goods again and ought to be reported to someone. What does not get discussed? Anything that would need to be discussed again later. The coffee clatch has a sense of resolution the local school board has never once achieved. Donna takes a bar off the plate. You take one too. Bringing store-bought to a coffee clatch is technically allowed, but it's like showing up to a potluck with a receipt still in the bag, technically fine, socially noted, never forgotten. Your 7-layer bars are always homemade. Donna's are always homemade. This is not a coincidence. This is a treaty. The bars sit on a Pyrex plate, which Donna carries back and forth between houses so often it has stopped feeling like it belongs to anyone specific. The Pyrex has opinions about this. It is stoic about them. You refill her cup without asking, because the percolator is right there, and asking would waste time both of you could spend talking about the new Lipton mix recipe that Janet from 2 streets over made into a pot roast and served on Sunday, which apparently held together in a way that pot roast historically has not. By 10:30, Donna goes home to start her own morning list. The side door closes. The kitchen is quiet except for the percolator, still cycling, still holding at the temperature it has held since 6, doing what it was built to do with the blunt, slightly scorched dedication of something that was never designed to stop. You refill your cup a 3rd time. It is, by any reasonable measure, no longer good coffee. You drink it anyway, standing at the counter, looking at the list on the notepad by the phone. Thursday is shopping day. The list has been growing since Monday. 14 items so far, and you haven't gotten to the canned goods yet. You are assembling lunch boxes at the counter while the eggs are still going, because the children leave before you've had a chance to sit down. Each box is a small metal case with a matching thermos, and each one has to contain a sandwich, a piece of fruit, something sweet, and a drink that won't leak by noon. The sandwiches are built on an assembly line of white bread laid across the formica. You spread, you stack, you cut. 3 boxes snap shut. The thermoses are filled and the day's first deadline is already gone. Let's talk about the sandwich. It's not a sandwich. It's a structural argument made of Wonder Bread, held together by a thin coat of mayonnaise and whatever you found in the refrigerator this morning with enough conviction to become filling. Peanut butter and jelly is the simplest version and also the most defensible, because children eat it without negotiation. Bologna with yellow mustard is Tuesday. Egg salad, loosely bound, and mildly optimistic is Wednesday. The bread compresses under the wax paper wrapping and arrives at noon in a slightly damp, faintly warm, and perfectly edible condition. The bread has made its peace with this. The sweet thing at the bottom of the box is a cookie, or a brownie cut into a square, or, on the weeks when you had the time, a piece of applesauce cake wrapped in wax paper that your youngest will trade sideways for a hostess Twinkie before the lunch bell finishes ringing. You know this. You pack the applesauce cake anyway. It's a matter of principle. Now, the thermos. Milk for the small one. Tomato soup, hot, poured straight from the can after 1 can of water, for the older two. The thermos is a tight-lidded silver cylinder with a glass interior that has cracked at least twice this school year and been replaced once. A neighbour's boy, Tommy Gruber, 4 houses down, dropped his on the gymnasium steps in September and carried warm milk in a mason jar wrapped in dish towel for the rest of the fall semester. Tommy Gruber tips his metal lunchbox like a suitcase when he walks, and every morning you watch him clear your driveway with the flat confidence of someone who has made peace with his situation. The fruit is a banana or a tangerine or, in October, an apple. The apple travels reasonably well. The banana does not travel at all. It arrives bruised, a little philosophical, the colour of a decision you regret. You pack it anyway because it's there and because wasting food is not something this kitchen does. Of course, the school also serves lunch. Hot lunch is 35 cents, which is a real number that you weigh every Monday morning against what's already in the boxes and what's left from Sunday. Tuesdays are pizza day, which is the one day your son will not trade his tray for anything. The rest of the week, the school serves things called goulash and hot dish, and a beige substance classified as shepherd's pie, which are close cousins to what you're making at home for supper and are therefore fine. The lunch ladies move with the practiced calm of people who have made 1,000 portions of the same thing and stopped having opinions about it. You recognize that expression. You set the 3 finished boxes by the door in a row. Each one looks identical from the outside. The same dented corners, the same latches, the same scratched initials your husband pressed in with a pen the first week of school. Inside, the applesauce cake is wrapped. The thermos is sealed. The banana is doing its best. The boxes wait by the door with the quiet patience of objects that know they are about to have a very long day without you. You hand your child a packed lunchbox, and in doing so, you are making a quiet statement that the whole school will read at noon. Some children carry boxes packed at home. Some children are handed money to buy a tray in the cafeteria line. Which one your child does says something about your household, and everyone at the lunch table can see it. You are not just feeding a child. You are sending a small daily signal out into the world on a child's behalf, and the signal is the sandwich. The lunchbox itself has opinions. A dented Roy Rogers tin says something different from a pristine Hopalong Cassidy one. Both say something different from a paper bag, which is a confession. The thermos stopper that pops loose at the wrong moment, releasing 2 ounces of tomato soup into a jacket pocket, says nothing good for anyone. You have packed this box with the same systematic care you apply to everything else in the kitchen, and still the box will sometimes betray you. The thermos has its own agenda. What goes in the box and what your child actually wants are 2 different lists. Your child wants the hot lunch. The hot lunch today is macaroni and cheese and a roll and a carton of milk, and it costs 35 cents, and it arrives hot on a warm tray held by a cafeteria lady named Mrs. Holcomb, who distributes it without drama or assembly line anxiety. Your child has watched Tommy Gruber receive his tray every single day and has filed a formal internal grievance about the injustice. The grievance is never verbalized. It is expressed entirely through how slowly a peanut butter sandwich gets eaten. The hot lunch question is genuinely financial before it is anything else. 35 cents times 5 days is $1.75 a week, and on a grocery budget of $28 that math is noticeable. 3 children times $1.75 is $5.25 a week, which is more than a pound of hamburger and a dozen eggs and a can of something useful, all of it gone on cafeteria trays. You have done this calculation so many times it happens automatically, the way you calculate change before the cashier hands it over. The budget doesn't pause for cafeteria sentiment. The social geometry gets complicated fast. The children eating hot lunch are sometimes from households that can afford it easily. Sometimes they're from households where the mother simply works, and a packed lunch isn't possible, and nobody says this out loud. The packed lunch can signal careful homemaking, or it can signal exactly the opposite. and the difference depends entirely on what's inside. A tidy sandwich cut on the diagonal, an apple, 2 cookies wrapped in wax paper that reads one way. A single uncut sandwich and nothing else reads another. Your cookies are doing structural work you didn't assign them. Mrs. Patricia Elmore down on Chestnut opens her daughter's box every morning to check it the way a general inspects a formation. She tucks a small folded note inside, between the sandwich and the fruit. The note says something like Times Tuesday, have a lovely day times in very neat, careful and slightly anxious handwriting. Her daughter Carolyn unfolds it at the lunch table with the expression of someone receiving field dispatches from a distant war. She folds it back. She eats the diagonal sandwich. The apple is already bruised at the stem, which is what apples do in lunchboxes, and no amount of careful packing changes this. The apple knows what's coming. Of course, the thing your child most wants from the cafeteria line isn't even the macaroni. It's the small carton of chocolate milk, which isn't available at home in individual cartons and therefore carries the specific glamour of institutional scarcity. You send regular milk in the thermos. The thermos milk is colder, objectively better, thermodynamically speaking. Your child does not care about thermodynamics. By Friday, you've packed 4 lunches and calculated the 5th against the week's remaining budget. The calculation usually lands on packed. It almost always lands on packed. You wrap the sandwich, fill the thermos, tuck in whatever fruit has survived the week, and close the latch. The box goes out the door. The signal goes with it. Miss us. Holcomb will never know how close it was. You spend the back half of the afternoon working toward a single fixed moment. The food must be hot and on the table when he walks through the door, somewhere between 5:30 and 6:30. This is not a preference. It is the load-bearing deadline of the entire day, and everything you cook is timed backward from it. The children have homework and a bedtime. He needs to eat and then sit. You need the kitchen clean before any of that. The clock is the real recipe, and the clock does not negotiate. On a Tuesday, what's actually on the table is probably ground beef. Hamburger is the workhorse of the weeknight kitchen, 45 cents a pound, reliable, quick, and willing to become almost anything you ask of it. A meatloaf if you started it at 4. Stuffed bell peppers if you felt ambitious at 2. Sloppy joes if the day got away from you entirely, which it did. The bell peppers get filled with a mixture of beef, rice, and a half can of tomato soup, placed in a baking dish with a splash of water and covered with foil. They cook for 50 minutes. The oven does the back half of the work. This arrangement suits everyone. Somewhere under, over, or beside the main thing, there are vegetables. Green beans from a can, opened with the small electric opener mounted under the cabinet, emptied into a saucepan with a pat of butter and a lid, and cooked over medium heat for 30 to 40 minutes. You test one with a butter knife. It should offer no resistance. Resistance is underdone. The beans turn a soft, muted colour, somewhere between green and the memory of green, and this is correct. About 25 million Americans in 1955 wear full dentures, and the green bean has learned to respect that. The cream of mushroom soup goes in next. It isn't a soup. Nobody at this table is having it in a bowl. It's a sauce. You pour it directly over pork chops and slide the whole pan into the oven. You stir it into noodles with a handful of frozen peas. You mix it with green beans and top the dish with crushed crackers, which is a recipe a woman named Dorcas Riley invented at Campbell's test kitchen this very year, 1955, and which will appear on Thanksgiving tables for the next 7 decades without anyone thinking to question it. The can does not know any of this. The can just sits there, lid half off, waiting. Now, Vera Hutchins at the end of Sycamore Drive sets her casserole on the counter at 5:22 and blots her hands on her apron with the specific efficiency of someone who has made this dish 40 times and will make it 40. More. She lifts the lid, checks the colour of the topping, and puts the lid back. The topping is fine. The topping is always fine. Her husband will eat it without remarking on it, which after 11 years she has come to understand as the highest possible praise. The casserole is, if you want to be direct about it, a single beige argument in a baking dish. Protein, starch, creamy binder, crunchy top, and it solves the 6 o'clock problem completely. It goes from oven to trivet to table without requiring a second thought or a second pan. It's basically a meal prep bowl, except held together by condensed soup instead of intention, and nobody photographs it for anything. Of course, whatever shape the main dish takes, the timing is still yours to manage. Mashed potatoes need to come off the heat and get mashed at the last possible moment, or they go gluey. The rolls, canned, Pillsbury, popped from the cardboard tube with a spoon handle, need exactly 12 minutes and tend to get competitive about it, browning faster on one side than the other because the oven runs hot in the back left corner and has since you moved in. You know this. The oven knows you know. You've reached an understanding. At 5:58 the door opens. The children appear from somewhere. The plates go down. You carry the casserole dish to the table on a folded dish towel because the handles are hot, and you set it down on the trivet that lives in the center of the table every night like a small, practical throne. Everything smells like fried onions and something creamy, and the faint chemical warmth of a kitchen that's been running since morning. The family sits. The food is hot. The clock has been satisfied. Steam rises off the dish in a slow column under the overhead light, and for one held second, before the forks start, the kitchen is warm and quiet and exactly where it meant to be. You pull out your own chair last. You wake on Monday knowing that today you cannot really cook, because today belongs to the laundry. Even with a machine, the wash is an all-day physical job of loading, wringing, hanging, and hauling, and it leaves no hands free for the stove. So Monday dinner is decided in advance by exhaustion. It will be whatever is already cooked. The roast from yesterday comes out cold, the potatoes get turned into something. You set the meal on the table, having barely touched a pan. Monday eats what Sunday left behind. The roast has been resting in the refrigerator overnight, wrapped in wax paper, cooling into a stiffer version of itself. You slice it cold and arrange the slices on a plate with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this exact thing 47 Mondays in a row. The plate goes to the table. The plate does not complain. Let's talk about the potatoes. Yesterday's mashed potatoes have hardened into a solid disc overnight, which is its own small tragedy. So you fry them in the bacon keeper grease from the back of the stove. The flat grey disc goes into the pan and comes out as something crispier and arguably better. Your mother called this home fries. The Better Homes and Gardens cookbook calls them pan-browned potatoes. Your husband calls them Monday potatoes. They are all describing the same object. There's a jar of yesterday's gravy too, which is set to a wobble somewhere between gelatin and soup. You heat it slowly on the back burner, whisking it back into liquid, and it obliges with minimal argument. A reheated gravy is almost always more cooperative than a freshly made one. Something about the overnight rest improves its temperament. You pour it over the cold beef and call that plating. Meanwhile, a can of green beans opens from the pantry, different from last night's casserole, just the straight beans this time, boiled for 20 minutes with a spoonful of the bacon grease and a pinch of salt until they are thoroughly, diplomatically soft. Carol Denning 2 doors down boils hers for 35 minutes. You've tasted them. 35 minutes is ambition. 20 is practical. The beans arrive at the table already apologizing for their colour. The arithmetic is quietly brutal. Sunday's roast cost you 3 hours at the oven and cost you almost nothing tonight. The same beef, the same potatoes, the same strained drippings, run through a hot skillet and a reheated jar and set down again like nothing happened. You did the expensive part yesterday. Tonight you are just collecting on it. The children eat without ceremony. Your husband eats without noticing the meal is technically last night's dinner in a different arrangement. Nobody says this out loud. You sit down last, as usual, having been on your feet since 6 in the morning with an interruption only to switch the laundry from the washer to the line. Your house slippers have left a faint track across the linoleum, a record of the day's circuit. Kitchen to laundry room to line to kitchen to table. After dinner, a dish of canned peaches. The syrup is poured carefully, not wasted. The peaches have been sitting in their tin since Thursday, patient, waiting for exactly this. They are yielding and cool and require absolutely no effort, which is the highest virtue a food can have on a Monday. You did not make them. You opened them. On laundry day, that counts. You buy a single roast on the weekend knowing it has to do the work of several dinners because the meat is the most expensive thing in the cart and nothing goes to waste. The same piece of beef will be served hot and sliced on Sunday, cold on Monday, and broken down into hash or soup by Tuesday. You plan all 3 meals at the butcher counter before you've even paid. The roast isn't one dinner. It's a small economy you run by yourself, and you're the only one keeping the books. Sunday is the main event. The roast goes in at noon, low and slow, and for the next 2.5 hours the house smells like the inside of something very good is happening. You make mashed potatoes from scratch. a gelatin salad set the night before and unmolded just before serving, canned rolls heated in the same oven on the top rack, and whatever vegetable was on sale, boiled until the butter knife goes through it like a suggestion. The whole table is set with the good china. You carry the roast out like you've won something. Technically, you have. The same cut is about to work 4 shifts. Monday, you already know, cold leftovers and a 12-hour laundry operation. But Tuesday is where the real architecture shows up. By Tuesday, the roast has given you its best performance, and you're down to the ends, the less pretty slices, and whatever got pushed to the back of the refrigerator. This is where you make hash. You dice the beef, fry it with yesterday's cold potatoes and half an onion in whatever's in the grease keeper, and press it flat into the pan until it develops a crust. The crust is not optional. It is load-bearing. The hash comes out dark, crisp, and faintly stubborn. Norma Briggs down the street, the one who sets her table with matching placemats and once got a nod in the church newsletter for her deviled eggs, Norma does the hash slightly differently. She adds a splash of vinegar and a fried egg on top, presented without comment, as though this is simply how Tuesday works. It is, in Norma's kitchen, simply how Tuesday works. If there's enough left after hash, Wednesday gets soup. You simmer the bone with celery, a bay leaf, and whatever onion didn't make it into Monday. You add barley or egg noodles and a can of tomatoes. The bone gives you about 2 quarts, which feeds 4 people dinner and 2 people lunch the next day. A roast, in this arithmetic, is basically a subscription you only pay for once, except the subscription is 1 piece of beef and you are the only subscriber, and the cancellation policy is gravy. Let's talk about the fat. While the roast roasts, it produces drippings, and those drippings do not go down the drain. You strain them into a small bowl, let them cool and separate, skim off the solidified fat, and store it for gravy. The concentrated dark liquid at the bottom becomes the base of Sunday's gravy, which becomes Monday's reheated gravy, which, thinned further, becomes part of Tuesday's hash pan. Nothing is thrown away. The Crisco can is for baking. The ceramic keeper on the stove is for bacon grease. The bowl in the refrigerator is for beef fat. The system has subdivisions. By Wednesday dinner, the roast is functionally gone, but nothing about that feels like failure. The family has eaten well for 3 nights on a single investment, and you've tracked every ounce of it, in your head, because receipts don't tell you what a pot of soup costs per bowl, and nobody is doing that math but you. A 1955 Better Homes and Gardens cookbook has 40+ gelatin recipes and detailed guidance on table setting, but it doesn't include a ledger page. It assumed you were already keeping one. You build your entire Sunday around the oven, because Sunday dinner is the largest, slowest, most demanding meal of the week, and it cannot be rushed. A standing rib roast or a whole chicken goes in low and stays in for hours, and the timing of everything else bends to it. You calculate backward from when people will sit down, and the roast sets the schedule the way a tide sets a harbour. You slide the pan onto the rack and close the door. For the next 3 hours, the oven is in charge, and you work around it. Let's talk about what 3 hours actually means. It means mashed potatoes from scratch, time to finish exactly when the roast rests. It means a gelatin salad that was started yesterday and is currently in the icebox, firming up with the quiet confidence of something that knows it'll be ready before you are. It means canned rolls, the ones that come in a tube and require a firm tap against the counter edge to open, which startles you every single time. It means a vegetable cooked down until soft, because the table will include people who need it that way, and the Brussels sprouts have been going since 4 o'clock and are approaching the colour of old army fatigues. Your daughter Patty has been told to set the table. She sets it mostly correctly. 1 fork is wrong. You move it. The gelatin mould comes out of the icebox at some point before serving, not too early, because warmth is its enemy and it will go slack in a way that communicates something about you specifically. It has to wobble, not slosh, not sit inert. The faint, controlled wobble of a properly set mould is a technical achievement, and everyone at the table will register it without saying so. Inside it, suspended lime Jell-O, possibly with shredded carrots, possibly with canned mandarin oranges, possibly with cream cheese folded in, depending on the week. The mould sits on a bed of iceberg lettuce leaves because it needs a surface, and because this is how it's done. It is the most formal object on the table. It was made with more deliberate steps than anything else you cooked today. Nobody will comment on it. The gravy is made from drippings. Pan off the rack, fat skimmed and reserved, that goes into the ceramic keeper with the bacon grease, separated, labelled in your memory, and the brown stuff at the bottom of the pan gets flour and beef stock and a wooden spoon, and your full attention for about 7 minutes. Gravy doesn't set a timer for you. You watch it. The moment it coats the back of the spoon is the moment it's done, and if you miss that moment, you get paste, and if you pull it too early, you get soup, and either outcome registers at the table in the same silent way as a wobbling mould. Dinner has its own critics. They don't raise their hands. The whole meal lands on the table between 5:30 and 6:30, timed to when your husband walks through the door. This is not flexible. The roast has been resting under foil for 12 minutes because you've done this enough times to know that 12 minutes is correct. The potatoes are in the serving bowl with a pat of butter melting into the middle. The rolls are in a basket with a cloth napkin folded over them, because they hold heat better that way, and because a basket of rolls under a napkin is a small, warm, and quietly hopeful act of optimism. Everything is out. Everything is ready. The oven is empty for the first time since 10 this morning. The kitchen holds the heat of it, thick with roast and butter and the faint sugar of the rolls, the windows just beginning to fog at the corners. You sit down last. You stand at the counter peeling potatoes while the roast occupies the oven, because the meat is only half the job, and the other half is the parade of things that have to arrive alongside it. There are real mashed potatoes, peeled and boiled and mashed by hand. There is a cooked green vegetable, a salad set in gelatin, rolls warming from a can, and a dessert waiting in the wings. Each side has its own timing and its own pot. You are running 4 small operations at once, and all of them have to finish at the same minute. Let's talk about the potatoes. You use Idaho russets, 4 to 5 pounds, peeled with a paring knife over a bowl of cold water, because a peeled potato left in open air will go grey, and the grey will not be explained away. They go into salted boiling water for 20 minutes, drained, then back into the hot dry pot for 30 seconds. So the steam escapes and the flesh goes a little chalky. This is called drying them out. And your mother taught you this, and her mother taught her, and nobody wrote it down because it was simply correct. Then the hand masher, then butter, then hot milk added slowly, never cold, because cold milk makes the starch seize and the texture turns gluey. Gluey mashed potatoes are an announcement. Not a good one. The green vegetable is green beans, and they have been boiling for 35 minutes. They are tender in the way that only time and conviction can produce. A butter knife slides through them without resistance, which is the intended result. You don't apologize for the texture. You plate them with a knob of butter, and they lie flat and cooperative, darker now, olive drab and soft, like something that has made its peace. The gelatin mold has been waiting in the refrigerator since Saturday, cold and patient and slightly smug. You made it yesterday. Lime Jell-O dissolved in boiling water, cooled to the texture of raw egg whites, then loaded with grated carrots, crushed pineapple, and cream cheese broken into small clouds that suspend mid-wobble when set. You unmold it onto a plate lined with iceberg lettuce leaves, holding your breath, tipping the ring mold with the focused energy of someone diffusing something. It releases cleanly. The surface shimmers. A properly set mold has a faint, dignified, and entirely deliberate wobble, not a collapse, not a quiver, a wobble. And this wobble is load-bearing information about your competence as a woman. The mold holds. You exhale. Roland, your neighbour's husband, once remarked at a dinner party that a gelatin salad was a little unusual. He said it gently, the way a man says something he thinks is a compliment. The room went quiet in a way that had weight. The mould in question was lime and olive and cream cheese, and it was on the table because the hostess had worked on it for 2 days. Roland was not invited back until Easter. The rolls come from a can, Pillsbury, the kind that require you to press a spoon along the seam until the cardboard tube bursts open with a small pop. The pop is the best part of the rolls. The rolls themselves are pale, soft, pull-apart, brushed with butter right out of the oven, and no one at the table will think twice about them, which is the point. They are filling a bread-shaped space on the plate, and they are doing it without demanding anything from you. Canned rolls are basically a sous chef who requires no supervision and never takes credit. You appreciate this about them more than you'll ever say out loud. Dessert is an icebox cake assembled this afternoon. Chocolate wafers layered with whipped cream in a loaf pan, wrapped in wax paper, and chilled for 4 hours until the wafers go soft and the cream stiffens into something you can slice. It sits on the pedestal cake stand on the counter, waiting to be carried to the table like evidence. The pedestal cake stand is doing more work than most people realize. It is not just a stand. It is a statement about what kind of household this is and how seriously the household regards the arrival of dessert. The cake stand is the height of the statement, literally. You reach for a baking dish on a weeknight, and you are reaching for the single most useful idea in your kitchen, the casserole. Into one dish goes a protein, a starch, something creamy to hold it together, and something crunchy on top, and the whole thing bakes while you do everything else. It feeds a family of 6, it can be built ahead of time, and it goes straight from oven to table. You layer it without measuring. The casserole is less a recipe than a strategy. And tonight, like most nights, the strategy wins. The creamy binder isn't cream. It isn't a homemade sauce which would require a roux and your sustained attention, 2 things you are currently not offering. It's a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, opened with a sound like a small, satisfied exhale, poured directly over whatever is in the dish. By 1955, the country is swimming in the stuff, and almost none of it is being eaten as soup. Most of it is being poured straight onto other food. A woman named Dorcas Riley invented the green bean casserole in 1955, working in Campbell's test kitchen. She combined canned green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and French's fried onions in a baking dish, slid it into the oven, and produced a recipe that will be made approximately 20 million times this Thanksgiving. Dorcas did not win a Nobel Prize. She got a certificate. The casserole got immortality. Your version tonight involves egg noodles, a can of tuna, another can of mushroom soup, frozen peas that went into the dish still partially fused, and a layer of crushed Ritz crackers on top because the crackers brown nicely and give the surface something to do. The whole thing goes into a 350-degree oven and stays there while you fold laundry, settle a dispute about the television, and locate a missing shoe. The oven is doing the work. You have delegated. The smell announces itself about 20 minutes in. Fishy, creamy, with a sharp note from the crackers catching the butter. It settles low over the whole kitchen and stays there, warm and close, the kind of smell you stop noticing until you step out the back door and come in again. On Fridays, the neighbors know what you're having. Catholic households across the street are having the same thing. The smell drifts across 3 front lawns and nobody comments because everybody understands. It's basically a neighborhood calendar. Tuna noodle casserole means Friday. Frying onions and ground beef mean Tuesday. The nose keeps time. Now, the topping deserves its own consideration. Crushed Ritz crackers on Tuesdays, crushed potato chips on Wednesdays, breadcrumbs mixed with a dot of butter on Thursdays. The topping isn't structural. It's a gesture of effort. Something that says this dish had a final step. Someone considered it. It didn't just happen. A neighbor named Miriam, your informal casserole consultant, once pressed cornflakes into the top of her chicken bake and brought it to the church potluck. The cornflakes held. The church approved. Miriam has not stopped. Velveeta goes in some versions instead of the canned soup. You melt it in a saucepan and it becomes perfectly smooth, which is the whole point. Velveeta never breaks, never grains, never separates into a greasy puddle. Real cheese can turn on you in the heat. Velveeta never does. Which is sometimes exactly what you need at 5 in the afternoon when the casserole still has 40 minutes to go and the husband is 20 minutes out. The math of the casserole also works across days. What's in the dish Tuesday night is a slightly pressed, slightly firmer thing by Wednesday lunch. It reheats without complaint. It doesn't require explanation. You cover it with foil and slide it back into the oven and it comes out looking essentially the same as the night before, which is either a tribute to its structural integrity or a mild warning sign, depending on your perspective. The casserole runs on commitment and leftover noodles, and it keeps for days without anyone minding. The Pyrex dish it bakes in is the colour of butter. It sits on a trivet on the table, still warm, still bubbling faintly at the edges, and the family serves themselves with a large spoon. The dish has no serving suggestion. It doesn't need one. It just sits there, hot and beige and self-sufficient. You open a can of cream of mushroom soup, and you are not making soup. You almost never are. In this kitchen, the condensed can is a sauce, a binder, a base, the thing that turns 4 loose ingredients into a meal that holds together in the dish. It goes over pork chops, into the noodles, across the green beans, blended into a dip. You pour it in without water and stir. The label says soup. Everyone in the house knows it is something far more useful than that. and nobody calls it by its name. Campbell's produced about 1.5 billion cans a year by 1955. That's roughly 10 cans per household. You are personally responsible for several of them, and you haven't made a bowl of soup since February. The condensed can doesn't mind. It has no loyalty to its stated purpose. It goes where it's needed, which is everywhere, which is why the pantry always has 4. The pork chops go in first. You lay them flat in a Pyrex baking dish, pour 1 undiluted can directly over the top, cover with foil, and slide them into a 350-degree oven for an hour. What comes out is not glamorous. It is tender, hot, and entirely on time, which is the only review that counts tonight. The sauce has thickened slightly around the edges in a way that could generously be described as rustic. You call it that. Nobody disagrees. This is where Dorcas Riley fits in, though she'd never know you're thinking of her. In 1955, she stood in Campbell's test kitchen in Camden, New Jersey, and assembled green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and French's fried onions into a single baking dish. She was trying to give housewives something fast that used products they already owned. She succeeded so completely that the recipe is now printed on over 40 million cans a year, which makes Dorcas Riley the most cooked-from person in American history who most people couldn't name at gunpoint. The fried onion topping is the genius move. It goes on in the last 5 minutes, crisp on top, soft underneath where it meets the sauce, and it gives the whole dish a texture event that the green beans are not providing on their own. The green beans are not providing much of anything at this point. They've been in since the beginning. They're soft in a way that is less about cooking and more about surrender. A soft vegetable asks nothing of anyone at the table, and the casserole does not judge it for that. The casserole accommodates. Meanwhile, in the back of a kitchen drawer somewhere, there is a Good Housekeeping from March of last year, with a full-page cream of mushroom recipe on page 34. Not this recipe. A different one. Ground beef and egg noodles, topped with crushed potato chips. You made it twice. Your neighbour Estelle sets the torn-out page flat on the counter before she starts, like a surgeon reviewing the procedure, smoothing the crease with her palm each time before she reads the first line. She has made it 11 times. The recipe hasn't changed. Estelle smooths the crease anyway. Of course, the soup does more than casseroles. It goes into the slow cooker pot roast alongside a Lipton onion soup envelope, and the two of them together produce a gravy so deeply savoury that your husband once asked if you'd done something different. You hadn't. You'd done the exact same thing. The recipe is on the back of the Lipton envelope, which means every woman on the block is one grocery run away from making the exact same roast. The can opener is on the counter. It has a small rust spot near the hinge that you've wiped at twice this week without removing. You open the can, tip it over the dish, and use a wooden spoon to coax out the last bit that clings to the bottom. The can is reluctant. It gives up eventually. It always does. You buy ground beef more than any other fresh meat because it is cheap, it cooks fast, and it can become almost anything you need it to be. A single repertoire built on hamburger can carry you through most of a week without anyone noticing they are eating the same thing in 5 different shapes. Tonight it browns in the pan with onions, the most ordinary smell in the house. You break it apart with the side of a spoon. From this one skillet, the entire week's worth of weeknight dinners quietly branches out. Monday's version is the simplest. The Sunday roast handles Monday, but Tuesday belongs to ground beef, specifically hamburger patties shaped by hand and pressed flat, fried in the same cast-iron skillet you've been using since your mother packed it into a box and handed it to you at the door. You set a pat of butter on top of each patty while it rests, because that's what you do, because that's what she did. The butter slides down the side and pools against the potatoes, and no one comments on this because everyone expects it. Wednesday is stuffed peppers. You stand 4 bell peppers upright in a baking dish, and fill each one with a mixture of the same ground beef, uncooked rice, a can of tomatoes, and a pinch of something from the spice shelf. Missus. Gorecki down the street adds a little Worcestershire. You add a little Worcestershire. Everyone in the neighbourhood adds a little Worcestershire because Better Homes and Gardens told all of you the same thing in 1953. The peppers come out soft enough that a fork goes straight through, which is exactly right. They look, improbably, like a planned dinner. Thursday is where the week gets resourceful. Whatever ground beef you bought extra goes into sloppy joes. The meat cooked down with ketchup, a spoonful of brown sugar, and enough liquid that the whole thing has the structural ambiguity of a stew trying to be a sandwich. You spoon it onto soft white buns. The bun absorbs everything immediately and becomes part of the filling. Your children eat this without complaint, which is the only review that matters in this house. Friday has its own rules, which we'll get to. But Saturday's version of hamburger is the version that requires presentation. A meatloaf, packed into a loaf pan with a ketchup glaze striped across the top in parallel lines. A neighbour named Rosemary Holt glazes hers with brown sugar and dry mustard, which she will tell you about whether you ask or not. You glaze yours with ketchup, because the ketchup caramelizes into something halfway between sauce and lacquer, and the family expects this specific thing. The meatloaf comes out in one piece if you've done it right. It comes out in two pieces if the oven ran hot. It comes out in pieces either way, which is the point. None of this costs much. 45 cents a pound in 1955, which is roughly $5 in today's money, and you're feeding 4 people for 3 separate meals off a single purchase. The sloppy Joe mix gets stretched with a little more ketchup. The meatloaf gets extended with breadcrumbs and 1 egg. The stuffed peppers split each pepper into a serving and the pepper does half the work. Ground beef is less a protein and more a general-purpose structural material, the load-bearing wall of the weeknight dinner table. The smell of it frying with onions has settled permanently into the walls, not unpleasantly. It's just there, the way wallpaper is there, a background note, warm, oniony, and permanent. That means dinner is happening. You've been smelling it every Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday since you were in your mother's kitchen watching her break the meat apart with the side of a spoon. You do it the same way now. Your daughter watches from the doorway. The spoon keeps moving. You take the same pound of browned beef and you send it down one of 5 well-worn paths, depending on the night. It becomes patties under flour gravy, or it fills a hollowed green pepper with rice and tomato, or it loosens into a saucy pile spooned onto a bun. It can be chili, mild and canned and a long way from Texas, or it can be soup. You decide which by what's in the cupboard. The beef doesn't care which life it gets. You give it one, and the night is handled. Let's talk about the skillet. It's not a skillet. It's the load-bearing wall of the weeknight kitchen, a 10-inch cast-iron pan seasoned by 400 consecutive dinners, and it has developed opinions. It goes on the burner at 5 o'clock regardless of what's happening, and it does not get washed so much as wiped and quietly respected. Some nights it holds the Tuesday patties under their pale flour gravy. Some nights it just browns the beef and hands it off to a pot. The gravy goes lumpy if you stop stirring. You don't stop stirring. The skillet waits, patient, heavy, and faintly smug, while you do not stop stirring. Wednesday's stuffed peppers come back around, and by now your hands build them without consulting you. The one move worth noticing is the cap, a slice of Velveeta laid over each one, melting smooth and cooperative, no argument, before they emerge from the oven looking, improbably, like something from a magazine. Lorraine, 2 doors down, serves hers with a parsley garnish. Lorraine is the kind of person who has a parsley garnish ready, a clean apron, and a standing grudge against improvisation. You are watching this information carefully. Thursday is Sloppy Joe's again, the night the beef gives up any pretense of structure, cooked down with ketchup, brown sugar, and Worcestershire, which is in everything, like a background character who never gets credit. You don't need the recipe. Nobody does. What's worth noticing is the cycle. The kids want this dinner specifically, they will not want it next Thursday, and they will want it again the Thursday after that. This is the cycle. You are inside it. You have always been inside it. Chili appears on the rotation like a rumour. It's mild. It has to be mild. 1 can of kidney beans, 1 can of diced tomatoes, chili powder measured with a cautious spoon, the beef. It simmers for 45 minutes and gets served with crackers from the sleeve and a side of white bread in case the crackers aren't enough bread. This is chilly in the way that a studio apartment is a home, technically accurate, doing its job, not inviting comparison. Texas would not recognize it. Texas doesn't live here. The 5th path is soup, which is what happens on nights when the portion is short or the week has been long. The beef goes into a pot with broth, beef bouillon cube dissolved in hot water, plus a diced potato, a diced carrot, whatever green vegetable is left. You cook it until the carrot is completely soft, because the carrot takes 25 minutes and the carrot will take 25 minutes no matter what you'd prefer. The soup is hot, thick, and faintly medicinal, and tastes like a Tuesday in November. It is exactly what it needs to be. The whole system costs under $2 a night and feeds 4. The pantry supplies most of the variation: the ketchup, the Worcestershire, the canned tomatoes, the bouillon. The beef is just the chassis. Every night you bolt different parts onto it and call it dinner, and the family arrives at the table at 6 o'clock and eats what's there, and nobody asks what it was yesterday, because yesterday is over and the skillet is already clean. You unmold a gelatin salad onto a bed of lettuce and you are performing one of the strangest acts of competence this kitchen demands. Suspended inside the cool, faintly trembling shape are things that did not ask to be there: canned vegetables, shrimp, olives, sometimes tuna, sometimes cubes of cheese, all held in flavoured gelatin and turned out as a centrepiece. A clean release is a small triumph. A collapse is a quiet disaster. You loosen the mould with warm fingers and tip it onto the plate. Everything depends on the wobble holding. The gelatin salad's reputation isn't decoration, it's credentials. The 1955 Better Homes and Gardens cookbook contains over 40 separate recipes for gelatin salad. 40, as if the editors sat down and said, "We need more." Lime gelatin with cream cheese and crushed pineapple. Tomato aspic with celery and green olives. A pale, luminous ring mould holding shredded carrot and mandarin segments, which sits on your table looking faintly radioactive, weirdly festive, and entirely proud of itself. Your mother made these. Her mother made these. The wobble is inherited. The mechanics matter here. You dissolve the powder in boiling water, stir in the cold, fold in whatever the recipe suggests, and pour the whole thing into a ring mould you keep specifically for this purpose. Then the refrigerator holds it overnight. The gelatin is not forgiving about shortcuts. Rush it and you get a mould that slides off the plate like a slow apology. The correct texture, when tapped with a fork, gives a single polite tremor and stops. You watch it settle, the light catching in it, sliding once, going still, and something about that stillness is its own small reward, cool and green and finished. That tremor is the point. It says, "I planned ahead." It says, "I began this yesterday." Of course, not everything suspended in gelatin in 1955 is fruit. Savoury gelatin moulds exist, and they are treated as elegant. Cold shrimp in lemon gelatin, ringed with cucumber slices. Cream cheese and olive loaf set in unflavoured knocks. Tuna suspended in lime Jell-O, which sounds like a dare but appears in print as a dinner party showpiece. The guests do not comment. Neither do you. The gelatin has already made its position clear. Vivian Hooper, the woman 3 doors down, brings a tomato aspic ring to every neighbourhood potluck. She unmoulds it onto a platter lined with iceberg, presses a sprig of parsley into the top, and carries it to the table with both hands, and the expression of someone who has won something. She has, in a way. The aspic held. It always holds for Vivian. Nobody has asked her how. The savoury mould sits alongside everything else because it is cold, which is practical, and because it is made the day before, which is more practical still. You're already cooking the Sunday roast, monitoring the Tuesday casserole, timing the Thursday chops. A dish that asks nothing of you on the day it's served is a gift. The gelatin doesn't need tending. It just needs time and an undisturbed shelf in the refrigerator, which is, admittedly, a resource in somewhat contested supply, and yet the wobble remains the measure. A perfectly set mould that releases clean and trembles slightly without collapsing is basically a performance review, except the panel is your family and the score is communicated entirely through silence. No collapse goes unremarked internally. You know before you tip it. You can feel through the mould whether the night went right. The gelatin knows too. It's been deciding since yesterday. You open your cupboard and you are looking at the actual backbone of how this family eats. Cans of soup, cans of vegetables, cans of fruit, cans of fish, stacked in rows and pulled down daily. Because canned goods are not an emergency supply here, they are the everyday foundation. A can opener is the most used tool you own. You crank it around a lid, and the metal gives with a small tearing sigh. Half of tonight's dinner came out of cylinders, and that is not a shortcut. That is simply how the meal is built. Then there's Campbell's. By 1955, the company is producing roughly 1.5 billion cans of soup a year. That's approximately 10 cans for every household in the country. You are personally responsible for a meaningful portion of that number, and you have no regrets about it. The soup is not really soup. not most of the time. You open a can of cream of mushroom and it goes directly over pork chops before they meet the oven. It goes into green beans with fried onions on top. It goes into noodles, into potato casseroles, into anything that needs a creamy binder but doesn't have the time or the ambition to produce one from scratch. It functions like a sauce the way a Swiss Army knife functions like a tool, broadly, confidently, in situations it wasn't technically designed for. Cream of chicken works the same way. So does cream of celery in a pinch. The can does not judge your creativity. The can shows up. This is where Dorcas Riley enters the picture. She works in Campbell's test kitchen in Camden, New Jersey, and in 1955 she combines cream of mushroom soup, green beans, and canned fried onions into a single casserole dish. The recipe gets printed on the soup label. Within months, it is in homes from Connecticut to California, made by women who have never met Dorcas and never will, following her instructions to the letter. It spreads the slow way, one printed label, one kitchen at a time, until it's simply everywhere and nobody remembers it arriving. Meanwhile, the canned vegetable shelf has its own logic. Green beans, corn, peas and beets, all waiting in their tins, already cooked once at the cannery and ready to be cooked again on your stove. You heat them in their own liquid, usually with a knob of butter, usually for longer than strictly necessary. The texture lands somewhere between tender and resigned. A vegetable with structural opinions is a vegetable nobody at this table asked for. Donna, down the street, keeps her canned goods organized by category and rotates stock from the back, like a small neighborhood grocery that has forgotten it is a kitchen. She opens a can of Del Monte peaches on Tuesday afternoon and arranges the slices on cottage cheese with the seriousness of a woman plating a tasting menu. The syrup goes into the fruit salad. Nothing leaves the can wasted. The fruit tins deserve their own moment. Canned peaches in heavy syrup, canned mandarin oranges, canned crushed pineapple. These are dessert, salad ingredient, and gelatin filling all at once, depending on the day of the week and what the mold situation is. Canned pineapple in particular has a dedicated relationship with savory dishes in this era, appearing alongside ham at a frequency that suggests a formal arrangement. Nobody negotiated it. It simply is. The fish shelf is the Friday shelf. A can of tuna, a can of salmon, sometimes a tin of sardines that gets opened with the cautious optimism of someone who has done this before and has complicated feelings about it. Tuna goes into the casserole with egg noodles and cream of mushroom, topped with crushed crackers that brown in the oven. The smell fills the house by 4 o'clock. The neighbours know what day it is without a calendar. You pull the last can from the row, crank the opener around it, and fold back the lid. The metallic tang hits first, food acid meeting lacquered tin, a smell with no polite modern equivalent. It's sharp and cold and a little bright, and it hangs in the air for a second after the lid comes free, the way a struck bell hangs. The contents slide out into the pot with the calm inevitability of something that has been waiting since the cannery floor in 1954. Dinner doesn't start when you begin cooking. It started when someone filled this cylinder and sealed it shut. You are simply finishing what they began. You slice into a block of Velveeta knowing exactly what it will do, which is the entire reason it lives in your refrigerator. It melts into a smooth, even pour without separating, without curdling, without any of the temperamental behavior of ordinary cheese. It goes over noodles, into sauces, across casseroles, melting on command every time. You drop the cubes into the pot and they surrender to the heat without complaint. Real cheese has moods. This block has none, and in a kitchen where dinner cannot afford a surprise, a cheese with no opinions is worth keeping. Kraft has been selling Velveeta since 1928, which means it predates the microwave, the electric range, and the suburban housing boom that gave you this kitchen in the first place. By the 1950s, it's not a novelty, it's infrastructure. The box sits in the refrigerator drawer with the same quiet authority as the fuse box in the basement. You don't think about it until you need it, and when you need it, it performs. The label says pasteurized processed cheese product, which is a description that technically contains the word cheese and therefore counts. Velveeta does more than one thing in your kitchen. It's a Tuesday mac and cheese without any risk of the sauce going grainy. It's a queso dip for the bridge club that comes together in 10 minutes and holds its consistency from first scoop to last, long after the Ritz crackers are gone. It's a grilled cheese, smooth, even and structurally sound, that never sticks, tears, or burns into a weld. Lorraine from 2 doors down, The one with the immaculate kitchen and the deep grudge against improvisation drops a half block into her broccoli soup every Thursday without saying a word about it. She doesn't have to. The soup glows. The scientific angle matters to you more than it would to previous generations. Food scientists developed it. Home economists recommend it. Good housekeeping has approved it. In 1955, the approval of a trained scientist and the approval of good housekeeping are roughly equivalent, and both carry more authority than your own instincts. Your instincts once let a bechamel break on a Tuesday in front of your mother-in-law. You have not forgotten this. Velveeta's other virtue is patience. You can melt it early and hold it warm, and it will not inform you of this delay by becoming a greasy separated puddle. It simply waits. The same cannot be said for a hollandaise, a fondue, or a human being asked to hold dinner past 6 o'clock. The casserole is in the oven. The cheese is in the pot. Both of them are cooperating, which puts them ahead of the timeline. There's a whole category of mid-century cooking that only works because of Velveeta. The warm dip, the stuffed celery with the smooth filling, the cheeseburger pie that gets its even top crust from a thin Velveeta pour. These dishes aren't accidents. They're engineered outcomes, and you are the engineer. The equipment just happens to be a foil-wrapped block and a medium saucepan on a GE range. You close the refrigerator. The remaining half block goes back in, cut side wrapped in wax paper, where it will wait without complaint until Thursday. Real cheese, left like that, would begin forming opinions almost immediately. Small white ones, usually. You plan Friday's dinner around a rule that has nothing to do with cooking and everything to do with the calendar of the church. In a Catholic household, Friday means no meat, and so Friday means fish, every week, by obligation. The dish that solves this most reliably is the tuna noodle casserole. Canned tuna, egg noodles, the inevitable can of soup, peas, and a crushed cracker top. You build it in the same dish you use for everything else. The rule decides the meal before you do, and the meal arrives on schedule, week after week. The smell arrives before the dish does. There's a specific combination, fishy, creamy, faintly scorched where the cracker crumbs met the butter, that travels through walls. Your neighbours don't need to ask what you're having. By 1955, roughly a quarter of Americans are Catholic, which means on any given Friday evening, the same casserole is baking in 1 out of every 4 kitchens on the block. The neighbourhood smells like a consensus. The assembly is the same every Friday. The cream of mushroom soup goes in undiluted. It has a job here, and diluting it would be asking it to underperform. The tuna is drained, pressed gently against the can lid, then folded in. The peas come from a can or from a box of frozen bird's eye, depending on your budget and your opinion of freezer storage. You add a little milk, a little salt, and then you layer the cracker crumbs on top because someone at some point decided that the casserole needed a crust, and that person was correct. The whole thing bakes at 375 degrees for about 35 minutes until it is set, bubbling at the edges, and recognizable from 2 rooms away. By the time it's bubbling, the whole house has gone warm and close and faintly oceanic, the windows sweating a little at the corners, the smell settling into the curtains to stay until Sunday. Mrs. Kowalski, next door, adds a sliced hard-boiled egg on top before the crumbs go on. She arranges the slices in a careful, overlapping and faintly obsessive ring, pressing each one flat with 2 fingers and 1 decisive tap. She has never explained why. Nobody has asked. Of course, if there are children in the house, a Friday alternative presents itself in 1953 in the form of the fish stick. Gorton's and Birdseye both launch frozen fish sticks the same year, and children immediately prefer them to anything that smells like a casserole. They are rectangular. They are uniform. They come out of the oven looking exactly like they looked going in, which is a quality that no fresh fish has ever managed. You serve them with ketchup and the children are, briefly, pleased. This is notable because the children are rarely pleased. The fish stick is, in its way, Velveeta applied to the sea. Same logic. Take something unpredictable, enclose it in something reliable, and call it modern. For households without a strong Friday fish tradition, the tuna still shows up in other forms. Tuna salad on white bread for lunch, tuna melts on a Thursday when the week is running out of ideas, tuna mixed with cream cheese and served on crackers at a party, where everyone pretends the cracker is the point. The canned tuna of the 1950s does a great deal of work for a very modest ingredient. It costs about 29 cents a can. It asks very little of you. It is present. By the end of the decade, Starkist Charlie the Tuna is already appearing in early advertising. Cheerful, aspirational, actively campaigning to be eaten, which is a level of brand loyalty that no other protein has ever attempted and possibly shouldn't have. The casserole doesn't know any of this. It just waits in the oven, doing what it does, smelling the way it smells, arriving at 6:15 without complaint. You keep a box of fish sticks in the freezer for the children who will not eat anything that looks like fish, which is most of them. They are breaded, uniform, and pre-cooked, and they go from freezer to oven to plate with almost no effort on your part. On a Friday when the casserole would start a rebellion, the fish sticks keep the peace. You spread them on a neat grid on the tray. They ask nothing of you and almost nothing of the children, and on a Friday night, that is the entire point. Gorton's and Bird's Eye launched their fish sticks in 1953, and they moved through American freezer sections with the quiet confidence of a product that already knew it had won. The fish inside is cod, white, mild, and inoffensive. The breading is the point. The breading is doing the heavy diplomatic work of making a fish taste like a cracker, and the children accept this arrangement without negotiation. Let's talk about what frozen food means in this kitchen. Your freezer compartment is roughly the size of a shoebox and frosts over every 3 weeks in a way that requires a butter knife and a bad attitude to resolve. You keep the fish sticks, a container of Bird's Eye orange juice concentrate, maybe a quart of ice cream. That is the inventory. The freezer is not a storage system. It is a small, ice-encrusted promise that you made to yourself when you bought the Frigidaire. Nancy Wilhite from 2 doors down sets her fish sticks in a single row and serves them with a ramekin of ketchup presented like it is a sauce and not ketchup. She has placed a sprig of parsley next to the ramekin. This is aspirational. The parsley does nothing. The ketchup is still ketchup. But her children eat without complaint and sit up straight, which is the actual aspiration, and the parsley is just load-bearing decor. You serve yours with canned peas on the side. The peas have been boiled gently, which in 1955 means until they are soft and yield without protest. They are the colour of an old army jacket. They don't argue with the fish sticks, and on a Friday that qualifies as harmony. The fish sticks are done when they are golden, and the kitchen smells like the inside of a box of crackers, lightly oceanic. Not fishy the way the casserole is fishy. The casserole announces itself to the whole street. The fish sticks are polite about it. They sit on the plate in their grid formation like tiny edible index cards, and the children eat them in 3 bites each and ask for more, which almost never happens with the casserole, and never happens with anything containing visible onion. The freezer section earns its keep on exactly these nights. Not because the food is exceptional, it isn't, but because it solves a very specific Friday problem, which is a child who won't eat tuna, a meatless obligation, and a mother who has already spent 18 hours this week in the kitchen and has no remaining patience for a negotiation. The fish stick is not a culinary achievement. It is a peace treaty, a very small, rectangular, golden-brown peace treaty. You pull the tray out of the oven, 14 fish sticks, all present, all correct, none of them burned, which is genuinely good news. You put them on the plate. You call the children. They come running, which is also good news, and rarer than it should be. You make dessert on an ordinary Tuesday for no special reason at all, because in this house dessert is not a treat for occasions. It is simply the end of dinner every night. Most nights it is something quick and packaged. A bowl of gelatin set that afternoon, a pudding from a box, canned fruit under a spoon of whipped topping. Nobody asks whether there will be dessert. You assemble it almost without thinking, between the main course and the dishes. The meal does not end with the meal. It ends with something sweet, and that is the rule. The pudding comes from a box, Jell-O brand, royal, mighty fine, and it requires 3 minutes of stirring on the stove and 4 hours of patience in the refrigerator. Chocolate is the default. Butterscotch happens on Tuesdays when the week feels long. Vanilla is what you make when you've run out of ideas but not out of milk, which describes a surprising number of Thursdays. You pour it into individual glass dishes, matched, because you have standards, and the pudding sets into something smooth, cool, and slightly trembling, like it's aware it's being observed. You slide them onto the cold shelf and a soft skin forms across each one over the next hour, the kind you'll either stir under or leave depending on who's at the table. It is not fancy. It is also not nothing. Weekends are where the real architecture appears. Saturday afternoon you make a pie, or an icebox cake, or a layer cake carried to the table on a pedestal stand with the gravity of a legal document being presented in court. The cake stand is important. It is not decorative, it is load-bearing, socially speaking. A cake presented flat on a plate says you ran out of time. A cake on a pedestal says you planned this, you executed it, and you are not embarrassed about either. Pearl Ellison, 3 doors down, once brought a sunken angel food to a church potluck. The cake stand has not forgiven her. The neighborhood hasn't either. The icebox cake is its own category. You layer chocolate wafers with whipped cream, wrap the whole construction in wax paper, and refrigerate it overnight, during which the wafers absorb the cream and soften into something that is technically a cake but has never seen an oven. It requires no baking, which means it requires no watching, which makes it the dessert equivalent of hiring someone else to do it. You didn't hire anyone. You just stopped applying heat. The result is cold and rich and sliceable, and your husband thinks it's sophisticated. He does not know it took 11 minutes. Of course, the gelatin shows up at dessert too. Lime Jell-O with crushed pineapple and cream cheese, set in a ring mold and unmolded onto a plate of lettuce, is technically a salad but operates as dessert, and nobody is interested in resolving this. The wobble is the point. A properly set mold holds its shape when you tap the plate, but gives, just slightly, when the light hits it, like something alive that's decided to cooperate. You unmold it at the table. You tap the bottom of the mold once, twice. It releases with a soft sigh. The children watch. This is theatre. You know it is theatre. You continue anyway. Nightly dessert is not extravagance. Flour, sugar, gelatin, a box of pudding, the whole week's dessert budget is modest, folded into the grocery run on Thursday without much ceremony. What it costs is time, and time is the one thing that's already fully allocated. But you build it in anyway, the way you build in the coffee at 6 and the dinner at 6 in the evening, because the structure of the day requires anchors, and something sweet at the end of a long one is an anchor that has never failed to hold. You make a pie on the weekend the slow way, by hand, because the weeknight shortcuts do not apply to the things that get noticed. The crust starts with flour and fat cut together until it just holds, rolled out on a floured board, fit into the plate without overworking it. 6 or 7 apples get peeled, sliced and sugared. This is the dessert that says effort was made, and effort is visible. You crimp the edge with your thumb around the rim. The weeknight pudding came from a box. This one did not, and everyone will know. The fat question gets settled first. Crisco is the modern answer. Clean, white, scientific, scooped straight from the can with a spoon like you're applying spackling compound. It heats to a chemical floral smell that sits in the kitchen curtains for the rest of the day. Some women still use lard, which has been in their family's pie crust since before electricity was in the house. Either way, the fat gets cut into the flour with 2 knives or a pastry blender until the texture suggests the word crumbly without fully committing to it. The water goes in cold, 1 tablespoon at a time. The dough does not tolerate enthusiasm. The apples come out of the bowl coated in cinnamon and sugar and a small quantity of flour to help thicken the juice, and they go into the shell in layers dense enough to hold their shape under the top crust. You know from experience that underspiced apples produce a filling that tastes like warm furniture. You know from experience, because you made that pie, once, and your husband said nothing, which was worse than him saying something. A neighbor named Dorothy Hendricks brings a store-bought pie to potlucks. Dorothy is not specifically shunned, but she is remembered. The oven temperature for pie is not the oven temperature for the rest of your baking. It starts high, 425, maybe 450, to set the crust fast, then drops to finish the interior without burning the edge. You tear strips of foil to fold over the crimped rim, because the crust there browns before anything else is ready, and the foil is not negotiable. The timer is a mechanical dial on the stove face, wound like a clock, with a bell that fires at full volume. It's been wrong before. You trust the smell more than the timer. The smell knows. The egg wash goes on last. A beaten egg brushed across the top crust gives it the deep amber finish that says the pie was made by someone who knows what she's doing. You score 2 small slits in the center with a paring knife so the steam has somewhere to go. The filling, contained, is already doing something in there, softening and collapsing and producing a thick syrup that will bubble up through the slits if the temperature held right. If it didn't hold right, the syrup runs under the crust and welds the whole pie to the dish. The dish has strong opinions about this outcome. The pie cools on the counter for at least 2 hours before it gets cut. It ticks faintly as it settles, the crust contracting, the kitchen slowly filling with cinnamon and butter and warm apple in a way that makes the 2 hours feel longer to everyone but you. Cutting early produces slices that fall apart and filling that pause rather than holes. You know this. You've explained this. The children believe the 2 hours are arbitrary, invented specifically to delay them. Your husband circles the kitchen once, evaluating. He doesn't say anything yet. He's waiting to see how it slices. It slices clean. The filling holds. The crust is golden, flaky, and intact at the edges from the foil. You serve it on the matched china with a small pour of cream or a scoop of vanilla ice cream from the Frigidaire, and the plate goes around the table and comes back empty. Nobody calls it remarkable. Remarkable isn't the word for something that was simply done correctly. The pedestal stand is back on the counter. The pie tin will need soaking. The weekend is not over yet, but the important part is finished. You do the week's shopping in a single trip, once, by car, on a Thursday or a Friday, because the daily walk to the market your mother made is over. The supermarket is large. It is far enough away that you drive, and you load the whole week into the trunk at once. The list is built around the meals you have already planned in your head. You steer the cart up one aisle and down the next. 7 days of breakfasts, lunches, and dinners get decided in under an hour, then folded into the back of the car. The store stocks roughly 3,750 products in 1955. By 1960, it will be over 8,000. Right now, it's manageable, which is to say it's only slightly overwhelming rather than completely. The canned goods aisle alone takes a while. Cream of mushroom goes in the cart without deliberation. Cream of celery, in case the mushroom runs out midweek. A can of cream of mushroom is not a soup. It's a sauce that hasn't decided what it's coating yet. The meat counter is where the week actually gets planned. Hamburger sits at 45 to 55 cents a pound, which makes it the workhorse. You buy enough for 2 or 3 weeknights, patties on Tuesday, sloppy joes on Wednesday, stuffed peppers later if there's time. On Sunday, you're looking at the standing rib roast or a whole chicken, and you're doing the math in your head. Hot on Sunday, cold sliced on Monday, hash or soup, stretched to Tuesday. 1 roast, 3 meals, and you are the only one keeping track of which night is which. The produce section is quick. Potatoes, carrots, a head of cabbage, canned green beans as backup, because green beans from a can cook in minutes and green beans from the garden need 30 to 45 minutes in boiling water before they're soft enough for everyone at the table. The vegetables understand their assignment. Inga Tollefson, who works the dairy end of the aisle on Thursdays, slides a brick of Velveeta onto the shelf and doesn't look up. You put it in the cart. Velveeta melts cleanly. It doesn't break. It doesn't separate into a greasy puddle with opinions, and it makes the macaroni on Wednesday look intentional. There's also a box of Jell-O, lime, because lime is correct for the mold you're planning for Sunday's table, and a second box in case the first one doesn't set right, which is a real possibility and a real consequence. The gelatin mold has to be right. A 1955 Better Homes and Gardens cookbook contains over 40 separate recipes for gelatin salad. 40. The faint wobble of a properly turned out mold on its lettuce bed is considered a measure of competence, which means the lime Jell-O going into the cart has a certain amount riding on it. You also get the cream cheese it will be suspended in. The mold will contain cream cheese, and possibly olives, and possibly a ring of canned mandarin segments, and the whole thing will be refrigerated overnight and unmolded before company arrives. This was considered elegant. It still is, to people who remember it as elegant. The baked goods aisle is where you slow down. Bread is store-bought now, the wrapped loaf, already sliced. But the coffee clatch is Saturday morning, and you're not bringing something from a package. Bringing store-bought to a coffee clatch is roughly the equivalent of a 1-star Yelp review, except the review is delivered in a low voice over a second cup of coffee and never fully retracted. You pick up flour, sugar, and a can of Crisco, not for the pie that's already planned, but for whatever you decide to bake on Friday evening when the week has settled and the kitchen is quiet, and there is no particular deadline except the one you've set yourself. The cart is heavy by the time you reach the checkout. $25 to $35 most weeks. About a quarter of what comes in goes out here, every Thursday, every week. The cashier knows your name. You know hers. The bags go into the trunk closes, and by the time you pull into the driveway, the week is already arranged in your head. Who eats what? On which night? in which dish, in which order. The planning is already done. The doing starts tomorrow. You push your cart through aisles holding thousands of separate products, and the abundance is its own small problem to manage. There are dozens of brands of the same thing, new products you've never bought arriving every month, and packaging designed to catch your eye and slow your hand. You came in with a list precisely so you would not have to think this much. You reach past the unfamiliar boxes for the ones you trust. The store wants you to wander. The list is how you keep your head, and the list is the only thing keeping the budget alive. By 1955, a typical supermarket stocks around 3,750 separate products. By 1960, that number climbs past 8,000. Not all at once, gradually. A new cereal here, a new cake mix there, a canned product in a flavor you didn't know you needed, in a size you don't quite want. The shelves expand outward and upward without asking your permission, and every new product is presented as a solution to a problem you were apparently having without knowing it. Let's talk about the cereal aisle specifically. It's not an aisle, it's a negotiation. Sugar Frosted Flakes arrived in 1952, Sugar Smacks in 1953. They're advertised directly at your children on Saturday morning television, which means your children have opinions about breakfast now, loud opinions formed before 8 a.m. On a weekend, you buy the cereal. You were not truly consulted about this. A woman named Eunice tips 3 boxes of cornflakes upright in her cart with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this exact thing 47 times and is not interested in counting to 48. Her children wanted the tiger. She bought the rooster. This is the kind of small daily authority she still holds, and she intends to keep it. Of course, the canned goods section is where the real loyalty lies. You don't deliberate here. You reach for the same red and white label the way you reach for a light switch in the dark, without looking, without thinking, with complete and total muscle memory. Your household is doing its part, and then some. The cream of mushroom doesn't get used as soup. It hasn't been used as soup in years. It goes over the pork chops, into the green bean casserole, across the noodles, and occasionally into a sauce situation that didn't strictly require it, but benefited anyway. The frozen food section is newer and still slightly strange to you. Bird's Eye has been selling frozen orange juice concentrate since 1946, and you've accepted that. Fish sticks appeared in 1953, Gorton's and Bird's Eye both, and your children treat them as a food group rather than a product. The freezer case hums with a cold, electric, and slightly smug authority it's still earning. You trust it more than you did 5 years ago, less than you'll trust it in 5 more. The budget needs watching most in this stretch. You are spending somewhere between $25 and $35 this trip, which is between 22 and 25% of what your household earns in a week. The number is not flexible. The number has opinions about substitutions. You look at a slightly nicer cut of something and put it back. The list already planned this out. The list is, in this sense, a very small and very firm financial advisor with no interest in indulgence. New products announce themselves from the end-of-aisle displays with the enthusiasm of someone who hasn't learned to read a room. Bright colors, bold fonts, a promise of modernity and ease tucked into every box. You look, you consider, you keep walking. You've been keeping house long enough to understand that new and improved is almost always one of those two things and rarely both. The cart fills up in the same order every week. Canned goods first, because they're heavy and the cart handles them better at the bottom. Produce next, handled briefly and set gently on top. Meat last, from the counter, wrapped in white butcher paper and slightly cold in your hand on the walk to the car. The whole thing runs about an hour. You'll do it again next Thursday, or Friday if Thursday goes sideways, and the list will say nearly the same things it said this week, and you will reach for the same boxes in the same order without slowing down. You shop with a fixed amount of money for the whole week, and you feel the limit of it in every aisle. Food takes nearly a quarter of what the household earns, and the weekly grocery sum is a hard ceiling, not a suggestion. Every choice in the cart is weighed against it. The cheaper cut, the can over the fresh, the meat stretched across more days. You add the prices in your head as you go. Nobody hands you a budget on paper. You simply carry the number with you, aisle after aisle, and you do not go over it. Hamburger is the answer to most of the week's problems. 45 cents a pound in 1955, which is the cheapest fresh meat in the case, and flexible enough to become 4 entirely different dinners without technically repeating itself. Monday, it's in the sloppy Joe mix. Thursday, it's stuffed into a bell pepper with rice and canned tomatoes. Friday, it's chili from a pot that started at noon. And somewhere in the middle of the week, it was patties, pan-fried and served with the drippings over mashed potatoes. The budget does not mind hamburger. The budget actively prefers it. Now, the roast. Sunday's standing rib or whole chicken costs real money. It's the week's biggest single purchase, and it earns that price by being 3 meals, not 1. Hot with gravy on Sunday, cold and sliced on Monday, because Monday is laundry day and the stove isn't happening. Hash or soup on Tuesday, with the carcass boiled down and the drippings strained into a jar. Edna Kowalski, 2 doors down, renders every last bit into schmaltz kept in a wide-mouth mason jar she's had since the Truman administration. She hands it to you once, matter-of-factly, the way a surgeon hands off a tool. You use it for 3 weeks. The canned goods aisle is where the math actually works. A can of green beans is 12 cents. A fresh bunch, if it's even in, costs more, goes bad faster, and requires more time than you have on a Tuesday. The can doesn't spoil. The can doesn't wilt on Thursday. The can has its own economy, and that economy is reliably in your favour. Campbell's cream of mushroom, also not a soup, still not a soup, never was a soup, is 20 cents and serves as a sauce for pork chops, a binder for the casserole, a gravy shortcut over noodles, and a polite fiction that the chicken bake has a cream sauce. 1 can. 4 applications. The math is very good. Velveeta is 16 cents for a solid brick of something that calls itself cheese and gets away with it. You buy it because real cheddar breaks in the heat, separates into grease and sad solids, and has the audacity to have texture. Velveeta melts clean. It's stable, cooperative, and tirelessly agreeable, like a very good employee. It goes into the macaroni, over the broccoli, and across the top of the potato casserole without complaint or structural failure. The food budget has no patience for drama, and Velveeta has never once caused any. The produce section is where you make the hard call every week. Potatoes, yes, always, because potatoes stretch anything and cost almost nothing. Carrots, yes. Onions, a bag. The rest depends on the number you're carrying. Cabbage is cheap and goes far. Canned corn is cheaper than fresh and doesn't demand anything from you. Green beans get boiled 30 to 40 minutes because that's how you cook them. Soft enough that a butter knife slides through without argument. Soft is not a failure of technique. Soft is a design specification. The trip ends at the register, and you've done the math correctly or you haven't. If you have, there's change, and the change goes into the jar on the kitchen counter for small purchases through the week. A bottle of milk, a loaf of bread, a box of Jell-O for whatever mold is happening Thursday. The jar isn't labelled. It doesn't need to be. The jar knows what it's for. You pour the hot bacon grease into a container kept on the back of the stove, because in this kitchen cooking fat is not waste. It is an ingredient saved for later. The bacon drippings flavour tomorrow's vegetables. The chicken fat goes into a jar in the refrigerator. The beef drippings get strained for gravy. None of it is poured down the drain, ever, because pouring it away would be genuinely wasteful, and you were not raised to be wasteful. You tip the pan and watch the fat settle in the keeper. Tomorrow's flavour is already in the container, waiting. The ceramic keeper has a lid with a small chip on the rim. You didn't chip it. The chip was there when your mother-in-law handed it to you, wrapped in newspaper, on your wedding day, with the same gravity someone might use to transfer a set of keys or a will. She said nothing. The transfer said everything. You keep it at the back left corner of the stove, where it has been since the day you moved in, and it will be there in a different kitchen if you ever move again. The fat goes in warm and amber and clouds slowly as it cools, a quiet inch of next week's flavour thickening in the dark behind the burner. Plenty else never reaches the bin, either. The heel of the bread loaf goes into a paper bag in the bread drawer. When the bag fills, you make stuffing or breadcrumbs or French toast on Sunday morning, whichever feels right. The slightly wilted celery and the last soft carrot go into whatever is simmering on Tuesday. A chicken carcass does not go in the trash. It goes in a pot with cold water and the onion half that's been sitting cut side down on the cutting board. And by evening you have stock, pale, fragrant, and faintly golden, which is basically broth, which is basically Monday's soup if you add the right can to it. Gladys Tipton, who lives 2 houses down and shops on the same Thursday you do, once told you she throws away drippings. You have thought about this several times since. Not with judgment, exactly, with something quieter than judgment, more like concern. The roast from Sunday is already doing its second job by Monday. Cold, sliced thin, served on a plate with whatever needs using up. By Tuesday it has moved into hash, diced small, fried in a skillet with the leftover potatoes, pressed flat with a spatula until the bottom crisps. The hash doesn't announce itself as resourcefulness. It just smells like a hot pan and drippings and someone who has been cooking since 7 in the morning and will be cooking again at 5. The ceramic keeper does its quiet work here. The drippings you saved Saturday are in the bottom of Tuesday's skillet right now. They were bacon last week. Their flavour this week. Nobody announced the handoff. It just happened the way it always does. There's a line, of course. Bread gone properly, mouldy goes out. Milk that's turned goes out. You hold it to your nose, make the call in a second, and drop it in the bin without ceremony. But short of that, the standing assumption in this kitchen is that almost anything still has one more use in it, and you'll find that use before you find the trash. You wipe the pan with a folded square of newspaper before it goes to the sink. The paper absorbs what the drippings didn't, and the pan comes clean faster, which means less hot water used, which matters because hot water costs something too. The newspaper goes in the kindling box. The kindling box is in the garage. Nothing in this house is a dead end. Everything is a waypoint. You learn what to cook the same way millions of other women do, from the magazines that arrive every month and the cookbook on the shelf. Better Homes and Gardens, Good Housekeeping, Ladies' Home Journal. These are not light reading. They are your instruction manuals, full of tested recipes calibrated for exactly your pantry and your skill. A seal of approval printed on a package tells you what to trust. You turn the pages looking for this week's dinners. The ideas in your kitchen rarely start in your kitchen. They start in print, and they arrive in the mail. The Better Homes and Gardens new cookbook sits on your shelf with a red and white plaid cover, and it has sold 14 million copies, which makes it the best-selling cookbook in American history, more than Julia Child, more than anyone. The pages are soft at the edges from use. The section on gelatin salads has over 40 separate recipes. 40. Not 40 pages, 40 recipes. For salad, made of gelatin. The cookbook treats this as normal because in 1955 it is normal, and the cookbook is not wrong about its audience. Let's talk about the Good Housekeeping seal. It's not a seal, it's a permission slip. A small oval printed on a can or a box or a bag means the Good Housekeeping Institute has tested the product and found it acceptable, which is basically the algorithm deciding your dinner, except the algorithm is Ladies' Home Journal, and it arrives monthly and smells faintly of perfume samples. You don't question the seal has already done the questioning on your behalf. The magazines run recipes in colour photographs, a moulded ring of pale pink salmon suspended in aspic, garnished with a curl of cucumber, centered on a bed of iceberg lettuce. It looks professional. It looks scientific. It looks like something a competent woman makes for company. Dorcas Riley, working in Campbell's test kitchen in 1955, invents green bean casserole, and it runs in print shortly after. By the time the recipe reaches your county, it feels like it was always there. You clip it from the page with scissors. The clipping goes into a recipe box. The recipe box is where the magazine lives permanently. Of course, the magazines also tell you what to want. A full-page spread shows a kitchen with new Formica counters and a GE electric range and a woman in a shirtwaist dress arranging a casserole dish with the composure of someone who has never once burned a roast. This is aspirational content. The woman in the photograph has better posture than you. Her apron is cleaner. There is no evidence she has been standing on linoleum since 6 in the morning. She is an invention, and she appears every month, and she is very helpful. Then there's the Lipton onion soup mix envelope. The recipe is printed on the back. Stir into sour cream for a dip, or pack around a pot roast, seal in foil, and braise. It spreads the slow way, household to household, until by the late 50s nearly every suburban kitchen has made the dip. Nobody knows who made it first. Everybody knows how to make it. The recipe came free in the box. You paid 32 cents for the soup and got the instructions thrown in. Margaret Foss, your neighbour 2 doors down, clips a recipe from the February issue and brings it to the coffee clatch folded in thirds. She sets it on the table next to the coffee cake she baked herself, which matters because she baked it herself. The recipe is for a salmon loaf with Velveeta and cream of mushroom soup. Velveeta is chosen because it melts smoothly and never breaks and has no opinions, which at this point in the week is what you want from a cheese. Margaret smooths the clipping flat with one hand. Someone asks if it sets firm enough to unmold. Margaret says she hasn't tried it yet. The conversation moves to the Spring Ladies' Home Journal. The clipping stays on the table. You fold it into your apron pocket on your way out. It'll go in the box with the others. You cook using a set of techniques you were formally taught as a teenager, in a required class, the same way the boys were taught to use a saw. Home economics drilled the fundamentals into you: how to make a white sauce, how to set a table correctly, how to test a cake with a toothpick, how to balance a meal across the official food groups. These were not hobbies. They were graded vocational skills. You whisk the flour into the butter without measuring, because your hands learned this years ago. The class is long over. The lessons run the kitchen. Let's talk about white sauce, not the fancy kind. It's a roux, equal parts butter and flour, cooked until the raw smell cooks off, then milk whisked in slowly until it thickens to something between cream and paste. Your home ec teacher, Mrs. Palumbo, made you write the ratios on an index card and then made you memorize them anyway, which told you everything about how she felt about index cards. You still hear her voice when the sauce starts to catch. Thin it, she says. You thin it. The USDA Basic 7 food groups, later trimmed to the Basic 4 in 1956, because 7 was asking a lot, were the structural architecture of every meal you planned: a protein, a starch, a green or yellow vegetable, something from the milk group, fruit or vitamin C. The chart hung in the home ec classroom between a poster about hand washing and a poster about hand washing with different fonts. Every dinner you put on the table is quietly still arranged according to that chart. You don't consult it. You don't need to. It's inside the meal. Table setting was its own unit. The fork goes on the left. The knife blade faces inward, because a blade facing outward was considered aggressive, and the dining table is not the place for aggression. Salad fork, dinner fork, in that order from outside in, because you work inward with each course. Your daughter does not remember this. She is 8. She will learn. The class diverged from the cookbooks on exactly this point. The magazines gave you recipes. Home ec gave you technique. The difference between knowing what to cook and knowing why it works. A white sauce thickens because starch granules swell and trap liquid. A cake rises because the leavening creates gas bubbles that the gluten structure holds. You didn't need to understand the chemistry to pass. But Mrs. Palumbo explained it anyway, in the flat, unhurried voice of someone who had explained it 400 times and intended to explain it 400 more. The toothpick test, the cold water test for candy, the window pane test for bread dough, where you stretch a small piece thin enough to see light through it, and if it tears, you knead longer, and if it holds, you're done. These are physical calibrations built into your hands over years of repetition. A thermometer confirms. Your hands already knew. Of course, the curriculum had its limits. Home ec taught you white sauce, not bechamel, because bechamel was French and therefore decorative, and the class was not in the decoration business. It taught roasting and braising and the correct internal temperature for pork. It did not teach you anything about garlic, because garlic was considered ethnic in a way that raised eyebrows in Westchester County in 1943. You have been cooking without it ever since, more or less comfortably, in the way you are comfortable with anything you are never given the option to miss. The grading was specific. Your table setting was marked on fork placement, napkin fold, and centerpiece proportion. Your white sauce was tasted and scored on texture, seasoning, and whether it had lumps. Lumps meant you rushed the whisking. Mrs. Palumbo never said this. She simply wrote times, lumpy times on the card and handed it back. You did not rush the whisking again. Now those afternoons in a classroom that smelled like institutional cleaner and someone's burned toast are 30 years behind you. And yet every time you test a cake, the toothpick comes out clean and you feel briefly, specifically satisfied. Not because the cake is good, though it usually is, but because the answer was the right one. Mrs. Palumbo would not have called this pride. She would have called it adequate technique. You have decided, privately, that they are the same thing. You host the neighbours for coffee in the late morning, and the small gathering comes with a test you are expected to pass. The coffee clatch is social, but it is also a quiet exhibition of competence, and the thing on the cake stand is the entry. Something baked at home, by you, set out on matched plates, is what's expected. Something bought from a store and passed off as homemade is a risk. You carry the cake to the table on its pedestal. The conversation is warm and the coffee is fine, and everyone is also, gently, keeping score. Let's talk about the coffee first. It has been percolating since 8 in the morning, which means by 10:30 it has crossed some invisible boundary between coffee and commitment. It holds at near boiling on the back burner, going quietly scorched, developing a dark, bitter and faintly burnt edge that nobody mentions and everyone accepts. You pour it into the good cups, the ones that match the saucers, and set each one down without rattling. The steam curls up between the chairs and the kitchen goes warm with it, and for a while the whole morning shrinks to the size of 2 cups and a cake stand. The percolator sits on the counter and continues to bubble with the energy of something that doesn't know it's already done. The cake is the point. You made it last night, in the good pan, and it came out level. Eleanor from next door brings a sponge that she claims took all morning, and you have your theories about that, because Eleanor's sponge is always identically perfect in a way that suggests a very consistent oven, or a very nearby bakery with a parking lot she hopes you haven't noticed. You don't say this, Eleanor doesn't say anything either. The cake stand sits between you like a small frosted truce. Bringing store-bought to a coffee clatch and presenting it as your own is basically being rated on Yelp, except the reviews are whispered over coffee and never come down. Gloria 2 doors over made that mistake in 1953, and the cellophane crinkle gave her away before she reached the table. The subject hasn't come up since. It doesn't need to. Now, the recipe on the card in your kitchen is probably from Better Homes and Gardens, the revised new cookbook with the red and white plaid cover. The book, as some women call it, is less a cookbook and more a verdict. It tells you what a successful household produces. You consult it the way other people consult lawyers. It does not accept questions. The women sitting in your kitchen are also its graduates. Marge makes a spice cake with brown butter frosting. Ruth does a chiffon with lemon glaze. You do your grandmother's sour cream coffee cake, the one with the streusel that goes into a bundt pan and comes out looking like it requires more skill than it does. This is the correct approach. A coffee clatch contribution should look difficult. The streusel does the work. The cake stand does real work here. It's not just a stand. It's a presentation decision. A pedestal that says this was considered, that the height was deliberate, that you have opinions about the vertical axis of dessert. You bought it at Woolworths for $2.40, and it has appeared at every gathering you've hosted since. It has its own authority now. A cake on a flat plate is refreshments. A cake on a pedestal is evidence. The talk moves through the neighborhood without rushing. Someone's husband is getting a new car. Someone's boy got into a summer program. The Hendersons have painted their shutters a color that isn't quite right, and everyone can agree on that without saying exactly what's wrong with it. You refill the cups. The coffee is scorched and fine. The cake has gone down to a third. Nobody reaches for the last piece first because the last piece has a different social weight than the others, and everyone at this table has known that since approximately age 9. You clear the plates when the visit ends, and the pedestal stand goes back to its shelf above the refrigerator. It'll come out again Thursday when Marge hosts. You'll bring the streusel cake again, or a variation of it, something with cinnamon, something from the book, something that arrives level and doesn't crinkle. You boil the green beans far longer than seems necessary, until they are soft enough to give way without resistance, and you do it on purpose. Vegetables in this kitchen are cooked well past what a later cook would call done. Beans simmered half an hour, carrots boiled until a butter knife slides through, sprouts gone soft and grey-green. There are real reasons. Long cooking once felt safer, the lessons taught it, and a great many people at the table cannot manage anything firm. You let the pot keep simmering. Soft is not a mistake here. Soft is the goal. Let's talk about the 25 million Americans in 1955 wearing full dentures. That's not a small number. That is roughly 1 in 7 people at any given dinner table, which goes a long way toward explaining why the era's vegetables arrive at a texture somewhere between cooked and surrendered. Your mother-in-law, Dorothy, cuts her carrots with the side of a spoon and doesn't comment. She has been cutting carrots with the side of a spoon her entire adult life. The carrots have accommodated her. Home economics class taught this too. White sauce, table setting, the USDA basic 7 food groups, and the correct cooking time for green beans, which was listed as 30 to 45 minutes, stated without irony, in a textbook with a cheerful cover illustration. You learned it the same year you learned to set a formal table with the fork tines facing up, and both lessons were delivered with equal authority. The bacon grease does its quiet work here. You've got a ceramic keeper on the back of the stove, beige, slightly sticky around the lid, and it contains the collected output of roughly every breakfast this week. You add a spoonful to the green beans near the end. The fat does something to soft vegetables that makes them taste like a decision rather than a consequence. Your neighbour Bernice adds schmaltz to hers, which she renders herself and stores in a small jar that always looks slightly amber, slightly suspicious. Neither of you wastes cooking fat. Throwing it away is a specific kind of wrong, the kind that registers somewhere between forgetting to return a borrowed dish and something genuinely unneighbourly. The sprouts are a separate matter. Brussels sprouts in 1955 spend enough time in boiling water to lose the colour they arrived with, going from green to a grey-green that is its own shade entirely. Not quite either thing, very much both. They're soft all the way through. They taste of themselves and hot water and, if you've been attentive, a little butter. You serve them in a small bowl with a spoon. Everyone takes some. Nobody says anything about the colour because the colour is correct. And yet there's a version of these same vegetables you could serve straight from a can, which you also do, sometimes on a Tuesday when the day has compressed itself into a single long inconvenience. Canned green beans take about 4 minutes. They arrive pre-softened, which is either efficiency or foresight, depending on your afternoon. You drain them, add butter, put them in a bowl. Nobody at the table can tell the difference, or if they can, they don't distinguish it from a preference. Soft is soft. The can just removed the weighting. The beans finish. You lift the lid, let the steam clear, and tilt the pot over the colander in the sink. The water runs off pale green, faintly grassy, carrying whatever vitamins it encountered on the way through. You add butter. A shake of salt. The beans settle into the serving bowl looking gentle, cooperative, and thoroughly defeated. Nothing firm, nothing alarming. Dorothy will manage them with a regular fork tonight. The butter is already melting into them, going quiet and gold. Steam comes off the bowl in a thin curtain and fogs the window over the sink, and the kitchen smells, for a moment, like every other Sunday you can remember. You operate a kitchen full of appliances that are newer than your marriage, and learning their habits is part of the daily work. The refrigerator hums where an icebox used to sit. The range has dials that promise precision the old stove never did. The freezer lets you keep food for weeks, which changes how you shop and how you plan. Each machine arrived with a promise and a quirk. You set the oven dial and trust it, mostly. The kitchen has been modernizing faster than anyone can quite keep up with, and you are the one who has to keep up. By 1950, roughly 80% of American homes have a refrigerator. 10 years earlier, it was closer to 44. The refrigerator's presence reorganizes everything. The daily trip to the butcher is gone, replaced by the Thursday supermarket run where you buy for the whole week at once. The iceman does not come anymore. He knocked twice a week for years. Now, your milkman, Walt, just nods at the new white box through the kitchen window like it personally cost him a root. What you have instead is a white enamel box that hums at a frequency the cat has opinions about, and a crisper drawer that has never once crisped anything. The range is its own negotiation. GE's Kitchen of Tomorrow campaign launched in 1948 and spent the following decade suggesting that the electric range was not a cooking appliance so much as a declaration of character. You are modern. You are scientific. You trust electricity. By 1955, about 55% of homes have made the switch. The dials have numbers. The numbers correspond to temperatures. The temperatures correspond to outcomes that the dial has, in practice, only loosely committed to. You learn to run your hand over the oven rack the way a doctor takes a pulse, checking, adjusting, not entirely relying on the reading. The oven knows what it's doing, roughly. Meanwhile, the freezer is the newest development and the one that changes daily life the most completely. Frozen orange juice concentrate, bird's eye, since 1946, means breakfast takes 30 seconds instead of 20 minutes of squeezing. Fish sticks arrive in 1953 and your children treat them as a personal favour from the future. You keep a bird's eye box in the back of the freezer behind the coffee can of ice and the ice cube trays, which stick and which you have to bang against the counter with enough force to rattle the salt shaker. The freezer is a marvel. The ice cube trays are not. When you crack the door, the cold rolls out in a slow white breath and hangs at your knees a second before it goes, and the whole box ticks and hums to itself like it's thinking. There's a Dorcas Riley in every machine, meaning there's someone you'll never meet who engineered the specific way this thing works, and you have to figure that out yourself. The percolator is simple enough. Coffee grounds, water, heat, time. But hold it at near boiling too long and the coffee goes from good to quietly punishing, a bitter, scorched smell that fills the kitchen by 9 and stays until noon. You learn the percolator's timing the hard way. Everyone does. You do it anyway because the coffee has to be hot when he gets home, and also because you started drinking it at 6. The Pyrex casserole dish is its own separate negotiation. It goes from refrigerator to oven, which is the miracle it was sold on, but it also gets hotter than you expect and stays hotter than seems reasonable, like something with a personal grievance. B. Kowalski from 2 doors down burned her hand on one in 1953 and still narrows her eyes at the word Pyrex. You hold it with the thickest dish towel you own and carry it to the table the way you'd carry something that has demonstrated it cannot be trusted. The Formica counter, smooth, pale and impervious, does not absorb smells, which is an improvement over wood but means that last night's onions and ground beef are still faintly present in the morning, hovering near the drain. The linoleum floor is easy to mop and hard to stand on for 6 hours, which you do anyway in house slippers because the alternative is shoes in your own kitchen, and that seems unnecessarily formal for someone who is already wearing an apron at 7 in the morning. The kitchen is efficient, modern, designed for a woman who knows exactly what she's doing. You know exactly what you're doing. The oven dial is still a conversation. You tear open a packet of dried onion soup mix, and you are not making soup with it either. You are making the recipe printed on the back of the envelope, the one half the country is also making this week. Stirred into a pot roast, it becomes dinner. Mixed into a container of sour cream, it becomes the dip that appears at every gathering you attend. The packet is a recipe distribution system disguised as a soup. You empty it over the meat. The instructions came free with the product, and the product made itself indispensable on the way in. Lipton launched the onion soup mix in 1952 and printed the pot roast recipe on the envelope almost immediately. By 1958, they've added the California dip, sour cream, the mix, done. And that one travels even faster. No cooking required. Stir, refrigerate, serve with ridged potato chips at the side. Look competent doing it. It's basically a recipe going viral, except the platform is a paper envelope and it takes 6 years to cross the country instead of 6 hours. Let's talk about what the envelope understood that you didn't know you needed. It understood that you're making dinner for 5 people on a Tuesday with 45 minutes and no backup plan. The pot roast goes into the Dutch oven, the mix goes on top, a cup of water goes in around the sides, the lid goes on. The onions soften in the oven for 2.5 hours while you deal with everything else. Meredith Paulson, who lives 2 houses down and once won a church potluck with this exact roast, lifts the lid with a dish towel and tilts her head slightly, assessing. The steam hits her face. She doesn't blink. She already knows it's right. The casserole and the soup mix run on one idea. A cream sauce made from scratch takes 20 minutes and your full attention. A can of condensed cream of mushroom soup takes a can opener and a willingness to not think about it. The soup isn't a soup. It's a binder, a sauce. A culinary structural engineer poured cold from a tin onto noodles, pork chops, green beans, or whatever is in the refrigerator holding still long enough to be casseroled. The can shows up wherever a sauce is needed and asks nothing in return. Of course, the California dip has a texture problem by modern standards, which is that it doesn't actually have a problem. It's thick, cool, and faintly salty in a way that makes the chips disappear faster than you planned. You bring it to the Henderson's house in a ceramic bowl with a piece of wax paper pressed on top to keep it from picking up refrigerator smells. You set it on the folding table next to the deviled eggs. Someone's husband puts too much on one chip and it collapses. Nobody comments. It's that kind of party. The thing about a recipe printed on packaging is that it asks nothing of you except compliance. Better Homes and Gardens will give you 40 gelatin salad recipes and a full-page discussion of which molds release cleanly. The Lipton envelope gives you 2 recipes and the confidence of knowing that 6 million other women made the same pot roast last week and nobody called it experimental. Ladies' Home Journal and the back of a soup packet decide your dinner between them, and neither one asks what you feel like eating. You slide the Dutch oven out at 6:15. The meat is fork tender, The liquid has reduced into something dark, glossy, and deeply savory, and the dried onion pieces have softened into the sauce in a way that makes them invisible but not absent. The smell is onion and beef and something deeper, the thing that happens when you leave meat alone in a closed space for long enough. It fills the kitchen the way nothing else from this decade quite manages. Dinner is on the table at 6:25, the envelope is already in the trash. You spend somewhere around 18 to 20 hours a week on cooking and the cleanup that follows it, and not one of those hours appears on any paycheck. The work is constant and invisible at the same time. The planning, the shopping, the prep, the cooking, the serving, and then the long stretch of dishes after everyone else has left the table. You stand at the sink while the house settles. The meal that took the afternoon is gone in 20 minutes. You wash the last pan. The work disappears the instant it's done, which is exactly how everyone has agreed not to see it. The 1954 USDA study that produced the 18 to 20 number also found that full-time homemakers averaged about 55 hours a week on housework total. Cooking is the largest single category. Not laundry, not cleaning, cooking, and the prep before it and the cleanup after it and the mental overhead of planning 4 meals a day, 7 days a week for a family that has opinions and a husband who needs dinner on the table by 6 at the absolute latest. The planning alone has no official name. It just lives in your head, the way water lives in a sponge. The math, laid out, is relentless. Breakfast, every day. Lunch for whoever's home, plus a packed lunch for whoever isn't. Dinner, always, without exception. Coffee throughout the morning, which means the percolator is on from 7 a.m. and producing something increasingly scorched by 10. You are not a cook in the restaurant sense. You are a logistics operation that occasionally produces pie. A logistics operation that wears a bib apron and house slippers on linoleum that is cold before 8 a.m. and warm by 9. Harriet Stiles, your neighbour across the street, has a theory that the trick is prep work done before lunch. She stands at her counter at 10 in the morning, dicing onions with the focused expression of a field surgeon who has accepted her posting without complaint. She tells you this works. Harriet's husband has also never once commented on dinner. These facts may be related. Now, here's what the hours actually contain. Weekday mornings, eggs or oatmeal or both, orange juice from frozen concentrate, toast, coffee, and the cereal situation for children who want sugar-frosted flakes and nothing else. Weekday lunches, a sandwich, a can of soup heated in a saucepan, something from the refrigerator that needs using before Thursday. Weekday dinners, an hour minimum, often more, because the green beans need 30 to 45 minutes on the stove, and the casserole needs the oven preheated, and the mashed potatoes don't make themselves. They don't. You know this personally. And the dishes. The dishes are not a small thing. They are the second shift inside the first, relentless, thankless, and reliably wet. You wash and you dry and you stack and you put away, and by the time the kitchen is clean, the percolator needs to be emptied and rinsed for morning, and the grease keeper on the back of the stove needs a look, and someone has left a cup in the living room. The cup is always in the living room. The cup has made its way there without assistance and without remorse. Back at the sink, the water goes grey and slack, the last plate drips on the rack, and the kitchen ticks and cools around you in the particular silence of a room that is finally, briefly, done needing things. And then there's the saving, which never stops. The drippings from breakfast go into the ceramic jar. The jar flavours the vegetables later in the week. The grey-green water off the Brussels sprouts stays for soup stock. The Sunday roast drippings get strained for gravy. Every scrap is doing a second job, and the only person who could tell you the total saved is you, in your head, where the figure lives unwritten. The jar has been on that stove longer than the children have been alive. By 1956, over 30 million women listed homemaker as their primary occupation. 30 million people putting in 55 hours a week, not counted in GDP, not counted anywhere. The meal is gone in 20 minutes. The kitchen is clean by 7:30. Tomorrow, it starts again. You wipe down the counters one last time at the end of the day, and this final routine is how you put the kitchen to bed. The formica gets cleared and cleaned. The grease keeper goes back to its spot on the stove. Tomorrow's plan is already half formed in your head. The roast accounted for, the breakfast eggs counted. You sweep the last crumbs from the linoleum and shut off the light. The kitchen will be cold and waiting again in the morning, and you will be the first one in it, the way you were today and the way you'll be tomorrow. The dish towel hangs on the oven handle to dry. This is not decorative. It will still be slightly damp when you reach for it at 6 in the morning, and you'll use it anyway, because there isn't time to care about that. The Pyrex baking dish is back on its shelf. The cast iron skillet is dry, lightly oiled, and resting with the authority of something that has been doing this since your mother's kitchen and will be doing it long after yours. The percolator is off now, finally, after sitting at near boiling since 7 in the morning, growing incrementally more bitter with each passing hour, until by afternoon it had the flavour of a strongly worded opinion. You'll rinse it out, leave it on the counter ready to fill again, and in approximately 9 hours the whole cycle recommences. The percolator doesn't complain about this, it simply waits. Somewhere in the refrigerator, Tuesday's dinner is already decided. There's the roast from Sunday down to its final useful form. Not enough for slices anymore, just enough for hash or a soup if you stretch it with onion and a can of broth. The roast started as Sunday's centerpiece, became Monday's cold plate while you were elbow deep in laundry, and will finish tomorrow as hash, stretched with an onion and a can of broth, and nobody will call it the same meal. Margaret Foss, 3 houses down, is reportedly closing her kitchen around the same time you are, which you know because her kitchen light goes dark at roughly 8:15 every night, visible from your back window above the sink. She runs a tight schedule. Her desserts arrive at coffee clatch already plated, which says something, though exactly what is a matter of ongoing neighbourhood interpretation. She brought a store-bought coffee cake in April. Once. The event is not forgotten. The dessert dish from tonight is soaking in the sink. It was a pudding, chocolate, from a box, set in individual custard cups and carried to the table on a tray like small dignified ambassadors of the meal's conclusion. Nightly dessert isn't a luxury in this kitchen. It's structural. It signals that dinner is finished, that the table can be cleared, that the evening can begin. Without it, the meal would simply trail off, and meals in this house do not trail off. You check the bread box. There's enough for tomorrow's breakfast toast and the children's lunch sandwiches, but only if nobody has a second piece at breakfast. You make a mental note. The mental note joins approximately 40 other mental notes already in circulation, none of them written down, all of them accurate. The grocery list for Thursday is forming in a separate part of your mind, running quietly in the background the way a refrigerator hums, present, functional, never fully off. The linoleum is clean. The counters are empty. The kitchen smells faintly of dish soap and the ghost of fried onions, which have been present in some form in this room since approximately 1952 and have no plans to leave. You've been in here, in one form or another, for the better part of 12 hours. The kitchen doesn't acknowledge this. It just sits there, clean, empty, and quietly indifferent, with the air of a room that knows you'll be back. The last warmth of the day leaves the stove slowly, the metal ticking as it cools, the window over the sink black now and holding a faint reflection of you in the doorway. You shut off the light. The clock on the wall keeps going. You made it. 7 days, 3 meals a day, and one standing rib roast that quietly worked 4 separate shifts without ever once asking for overtime. You opened 17 cans. You poured cream of mushroom soup over things that were never soup and had never asked to become it. You unmolded a gelatin salad and held your breath until it wobbled, soft and cool and faintly smug. You timed dinner to the sound of a car in the driveway with the precision of an air traffic controller, fried onions and ground beef until the smell soaked into the wallpaper, and saved the bacon grease. You always saved the bacon grease, and then most of it vanished. That was the arrangement. The roast that took 3 hours got eaten in 20 minutes. The kitchen that ran from 6 in the morning was clean and dark by 7:30 at night. Tomorrow it would start again. Percolator first, linoleum cold underfoot, the whole patient circuit one more time. There were women behind the women too. The ones who stocked the supermarket shelves, cleaned the test kitchens at Campbell's, grew the green beans, printed the recipes, taught the home economics classes, and sorted the Jell-O packets, none of whose names ever made the index of any cookbook. They were there. The meal got to the table because they were there. And a warm thank you to whoever suggested this one. I hope your gelatin always releases clean on the first tap. So tonight, let the day fade. There is no roast to schedule, no mold to unfreeze, no husband's commute to cook backward from. Let your shoulders drop down away from your ears. Let your hands go soft and open and still. Let the percolator, somewhere far off, finally click itself off for the night. The counters are wiped. The greasekeeper is back in its corner on the stove. The kitchen is cold and clean and entirely finished with you until morning. Nobody's coming until Sunday. Sleep well.